Chapter 1931. Time passed slowly. Perhaps one couldn't feel the passage of time, but after some time, there was a strange sound. A mouthful of blood sprayed out from Yi Xian's mouth. His entire body staggered, and his indestructible body began to crack. Streams of blood spurted out from all over his body, and his entire body seemed to have turned into a terrifying blood man. Desolation, absolute beginning, roared in fear. Even Desolate was defeated by Abyss? But before Tai Chu went to check, something even more terrifying happened. Drip, drip, drip. Drops of blood dripped from the dark abyss formed by Yuan. The sound of jade breaking came from the dark abyss. The heavenly dark abyss that Abyss had turned into was collapsing horribly. After an explosion, the heavenly dark abyss disappeared, and Abyss body fell out. Blood, blood, beautiful blood, glaring and dazzling. Yuan half knelt in the void. His body was unharmed. Only the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth dyed his clothes red. The most terrifying thing wasn't that Yuan was bleeding, but that there was a bloody hole between his eyebrows. It was as if some terrifying power had pierced through it. Yuan's eyes were dull. His half-kneeling body could not stop trembling. More and more blood flowed out of his mouth. His eyes had lost their light and his expression was extremely stiff. A mouthful of blood sprayed out from Abyss's mouth. He trembled as he stood up with difficulty. The bloody hole between his eyebrows was exceptionally dazzling, but he turned around to look at Yi Xian. But, why is it like this? Yuan said hoarsely. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He stared at Yi Xian's back and asked the biggest question in his heart. At this moment, Yi Xian's entire body was bathed in blood, and his entire body was cracked like jade. Although he seemed to be heavily injured, only he and Abyss knew that Abyss had been defeated in that exchange, and his soul had been injured, while Yi Xian's body had only been damaged. One move. It was only the difference of a single move, but the outcome was decided. 9 Tribulations Heaven Abyss technique is indeed powerful. No wonder it's the #1 forbidden heavenly law. But you forgot that there's no such thing as invincible when it comes to law and doctrine. Have you ever heard of breaking all techniques with one move? Yi Xian said hoarsely. At this moment he was also extremely weak, but he was much better than Abyss. In fact, Yi Xian had been thinking about how to break 9 Tribulations Heaven Abyss technique. He finally found the biggest flaw of 9 Tribulations Heaven Abyss technique. Any law and doctrine was never invincible. There was a so-called doctrine of restraint, but it wasn't strong enough. To make a simple analogy, mortals always said that 4 ounces of 1,000 caddies. But could 4 ounces move 10,000 or even millions of jin? The so-called softness of strength was just strength was not enough to crush everything. When a person's strength was enough to crush everything, the so-called doctrine of restraint was just a joke. Yi Xian's attack just now was his strongest attack. Not only did it contain 2 earth-shattering cultivations, but it also contained 2 kinds of law and doctrine. With such an attack, no matter how strong 9 Tribulations Heaven Abyss technique was, it would be destroyed by one move. Breaking all techniques with one move? Yuan muttered, then laughed in anger. As he laughed, tears of humiliation flowed out. Then he suddenly roared at Yi Xian, Huang, although I lost to you by one move, I won't admit defeat. My defeat today is not because my law and doctrine are weak, but because my cultivation is not as good as yours. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he faced Yuan's unwilling roar. You'll never be able to see reality clearly. The winner is the king, the loser is the thief, and the weak are like dogs. You don't even understand this principle. In my eyes, you're just a piece of trash. Boom. Yi Xian arrived with a loud bang. His 5 fingers grabbed Abyss by the throat and lifted him into the air. If I kill you, do you think you'll still be alive? Yi Xian's voice was ice-cold as strands of killing intent blossomed. At this moment, he really wanted to kill Abyss, because this person was indeed his great enemy. Yi Xian always cut the weeds and get rid of the roots. He would never leave any trouble for himself. Today's battle could be said to be Yi Xian's most arduous battle. Although the process seemed to be extremely fast, the danger it contained could be said to be the greatest in his life. Yi Xian did not want to leave such a dangerous enemy alive. Yuan's talent were too terrifying. He was definitely above him. If he left such a person alive, he would be a great threat to him. At this moment, Yi Xian was filled with murderous intent. His 5 fingers were bursting with terrifying power. He wanted to kill Yuan completely. Come kill me. Yuan roared in anger. He did not want to die, but after today's defeat, he knew that Huang would not let him go. At this moment, Yi Xian frowned. His 5 fingers slowly loosened because he felt that something was wrong. He had just released his murderous intent and his body was showing signs of dissipating. The past could not be changed. Yi Xian roared in his heart. He really wanted to kill Abyss, but he definitely couldn't do so. Because if Abyss died, it would be the same as changing the past, and there wouldn't be a future generation of him. Yi Xian finally calmed down and casually threw Abyss out. You're not going to kill me? Abyss was shocked. If it were him, he wouldn't have let Famine go. He couldn't believe that Famine would spare his life. Killing you won't do me any good. However, you can rest assured that you will die in my hands in the future. Today, I'll give you a chance to fight me again in the future. Yi Xian coldly said. Huang, you will regret this. Yuan clenched his fists and looked at Yi Xian with a deep and terrifying gaze. Huang, I don't want to find any excuses to lose to you today. But I want to tell you that the 9 Calamity Heaven Abyss technique is not my limit. I will settle this with you in the future. Huang. Abyss dragged his heavily injured body far away and disappeared in an instant. Yi Xian frowned. In his mind, Yuan of the future universe appeared. He was afraid that Yuan of the future would be even more terrifying. After all, after the 3 eras, there would be countless chaotic universes. In the endless years, how far would Yuan have cultivated? But everything was a foregone conclusion. In the ancient era, he could not kill Yuan. There was nothing he could do. Why did you let him go? Absolute Beginning quietly appeared and looked at Yi Xian with a face full of astonishment. He can't die now. Yi Xian did not explain. His eyes were deep as he looked up at the ancient sky. No one knew what he was thinking. Chapter 1932. Where do you want to go next? Absolute Beginning didn't ask why Yi Xian didn't kill Abyss. After the battle with Abyss, Absolute Beginning realized that he wasn't strong enough, so he wanted to discuss with Yi Xian, hoping to break through his limits. Reincarnation will destroy the world. Even Abyss will fail. The ancient era will collapse in the reincarnation. I want to reincarnate and create the strongest technique of all time. Whether it's to break the curse, face Abyss in the future, or even wake Xiao up, I want to do it, Yi Xian said calmly. Reincarnation? The expression of Absolute Beginning abruptly changed as he looked at Yi Xian with extreme shock. Even his body and mind were trembling. It must be known that the so-called reincarnation cycle sounded extremely simple, but in fact, it was to make oneself disappear and live a new life to cultivate. This method was simply crazy to the extreme, and it was an act of courting death. One had to know that the path of cultivation was extremely difficult. If one were to be reborn and cultivate again, it was very likely that one would fall on the path of cultivation, and that would be true death. If you want to become strong, you have to take risks, Yi Xian said in a low voice. Actually, Yi Xian's words were only following the trajectory of history. Because the Absolute Beginning would also reincarnate like him, it was naturally impossible for him to say that he was an existence that returned to the past from the future. When are you going to reincarnate? Will we meet in the future? Absolute Beginning's eyes flashed as if he was hesitating. We will meet in the future, but I don't know if you'll still be you. Yi Xian looked at Absolute Beginning. Lu Bai's face flashed across his mind. Although they looked similar, they weren't the same person. Absolute Beginning lived in the ancient era, while Lu Bai lived in the future. Although they were the previous incarnation, their thoughts and emotions were different. It was like Desolate was Yi Xian's previous incarnation. Unfortunately, in the future, Lu Bai had awakened the memories of Absolute Beginning. He had always been conflicted about whether he was Absolute Beginning or Lu Bai, which made Yi Xian feel bitter. He didn't know when Lu Bai would be able to recognize himself. I'm leaving. If fate wills it, we'll meet again. Yi Xian took a step forward and disappeared from absolute beginning sight. Huang, let's meet again in the next life. Looking at Yi Xian's departing figure, absolute beginning finally made a shocking decision. His eyes were burning with determination. In a nameless valley, there was a clear ancient pond. Beside the pond, the two figures stood side by side. I'm leaving, Yi Xian said softly. I know. Tribulation smiled. You and I were of the same mind, but we made someone wait for me for countless years. I feel guilty. Yi Xian sighed. Ah. Tribulation laughed out loud. You are me and I am you. You and I are one. How can you feel guilty? I was too stubborn. Yi Xian suddenly came to a realization, and then laughed at himself. Yes, the two of them were one. How could he feel guilty? Could it be that he felt guilty for himself? In this life, we'll meet again in the future. In the future, I'll leave everything to you. The two smiled. Everything was understood without words. Rumble. In the next moment, the ancient river manifested, and the torrential waters surged. Yi Xian ascended into the sky, and an ancient wave appeared beneath his feet. He waved at tribulation, and then entered the ancient river. Whoosh! The ancient river, vast and surging, finally disappeared from the ancient world. Under Yi Xian's control, it returned to the chaotic universe of the future. The ancient river. Time passed. The ancient wave surged through time and space. Yi Xian allowed the wave beneath his feet to push him back, and he was returning to the chaotic universe of the future. It was a shocking land, and heaven and earth couldn't destroy it. The time travel, which was originally extremely dangerous, was no longer a threat to Yi Xian. He and the ancient river seemed to have turned into a beam of light. One chaotic universe after another flashed before his eyes, and he was returning to the future at an extremely fast speed. This trip back to the past allowed Yi Xian to understand a lot of things. He also learned a lot of secrets, and even made arrangements in the past for eternity. Yi Xian stood with his hands behind his back. The ancient wave surged beneath his feet. His expression was tranquil, and only his eyes were extremely deep. 3 lives in one. At this moment, Yi Xian had cultivated 2 lives to perfection. Only his future self remained in the ancient world to cultivate the ancient heaven-shocking art. Yi Xian pondered. When he returned to the chaotic universe of the future, his future self would fuse with 3 lives in one. Would he be able to transcend the eternal universe, truly push open the door, and fight the mysterious existence behind the door? This was Yi Xian's ultimate goal. He wanted to achieve great freedom, to truly transcend the eternal universe, and to truly reign above it. Of course, the so-called 3 lives in one wasn't that simple. To create the strongest technique of all time with 3 lives in one was likely to be fraught with difficulties. Past, present, and future. These were the laws and daos of 3 lives. However, to fuse 3 different laws and daos together to create the strongest technique of all time was definitely not that simple. Yi Xian knew himself best. At this moment, he had cultivated 2 lives to perfection, but the 2 laws and daos circulated in his body alone. There were no signs of them fusing together. To put it bluntly, in Yi Xian's battle with Abyss, his strongest strike had barely been able to fuse the 2 laws and daos together. He had also suffered a tremendous backlash. If he could truly fuse the 2 lives Dharma and daos together, his battle with Abyss wouldn't have been so perilous. To put it bluntly, the desolate heaven Dharma was the desolate heaven Dharma, while the heaven burial art was the heaven burial art. They were 2 different laws and daos. Furthermore, the future self's shocking art required Yi Xian to fuse the 3 lives in one. Furthermore, Yi Xian didn't forget that Abyss of the future was his greatest enemy. After experiencing countless chaotic universes, how powerful was Abyss of the future? Yi Xian was definitely not an arrogant person. This was because he knew very well that as he grew, so did others. Just like Abyss, he had created the 9 tribulations heavenly Abyss Dharma in ancient times and cultivated it to perfection. After countless years, Abyss was definitely stronger than he was in ancient times. To what extent had his laws and daos been cultivated? Yi Xian clearly remembered what Abyss had said to him when he returned to the past. Even if he returned to the past and became a terrifying land, he would still not be Abyss's match when he returned. On the other hand, after returning to the past and receiving Famine's memories, Yi Xian knew very well what was behind the door. He knew how Famine had pushed open the door to samsara. In fact, instead of saying that Famine had pushed open the door, it was better to say that the door to samsara had opened by itself. Only then could Famine successfully enter. However, there was one matter that left Yi Xian puzzled. He even felt uneasy. Chapter 1933. The memory of Famine entering the gate of reincarnation was extremely blurry. All Yi Xian knew was that there was a mysterious existence within the gate of reincarnation, but he had his back to the masses and couldn't see his face clearly. Even in Famine's most powerful battle, he still hadn't seen how that mysterious existence attacked, but Famine had already suffered a crushing defeat. This memory was extremely blurry, as if part of it had been sealed away. Yi Xian only remembered that in his past life, he had brought out the 12 Heavenbreaker cauldrons, the ancient bronze scripture, and the Heavenbreaker halberd. This memory was blurry and fragmented, but Yi Xian remembered an extremely important clue: the secrets of the Heavenbreaker cauldrons, the Heavenbreaker halberd, and the ancient bronze scripture. These 3 items were the keys to opening the gate of reincarnation. Without them, no matter how powerful one was, they wouldn't be able to open the gate of reincarnation. While Yi Xian was lost in thought, the river of eternity rumbled and surged, bringing Yi Xian back to his own spacetime. Finally, Yi Xian's mind stirred, and he awoke from his thoughts. His eyes darted around as he saw his own chaos verse. Rumble! A massive wave rose up from the river of eternity, shattering spacetime. Yi Xian took a step forward and appeared in the outside world. He had returned. The chaos verse. The starry sky was boundless. As soon as Yi Xian returned to the chaos verse, he retracted his aura, making him seem like an ordinary mortal. He didn't unleash any shocking power at all. It wasn't that Yi Xian was intentionally concealing his aura, but that he was terrifyingly powerful. If he used his own power, he could cause the entire chaos verse to explode. It must be noted that the chaos verse of his past life wasn't one of the 3 most powerful eras. Heaven-defying transformations were the pinnacle, not to mention an existence as shocking as Yi Xian. The tiny chaos verse wasn't strong enough to contain Yi Xian's power. Other shocking existences had to restrain their own power as well. Otherwise, if they unleashed their true power, the entire chaos verse would experience a cataclysm. Hell, Taitsong, and Taichu had all been controlling their own power for fear of destroying the entire chaos verse. Rumble! When Yi Xian returned to the present, 2 figures instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian. They were Lu Bai and Taitsong, who had sent Yi Xian back to the 3 great eras. You're finally back. Taitsong's hair was still white, and his body was hunched like an old man in his twilight years. When he sensed Yi Xian's return, the 2 of them instantly arrived. Aren't you going to call me Big Brother? Looking at the white-haired Taitsong, Yi Xian smiled faintly with a hint of mockery in his eyes. It would have been better if Yi Xian hadn't said anything, but the moment he did, Taitsong's expression changed. He was shocked and stared at Yi Xian. Rumble! Primeval evil light filled the sky. Taitsong's aura suddenly became chaotic as the terrifying primeval evil light covered him, turning him into a young man. However, his eyes were filled with shock as he sized up Yi Xian. Could it be that the desolation from the past was you? Taitsong cried out in surprise. Memories from long ago flooded his mind, because the Yi Xian in front of him was filled with the power of desolation. He looked exactly like the desolation from all those years ago. The past could not be changed, but the past did exist. Since Yi Xian had returned to the past, his existence was naturally imprinted in the minds of Taitsong and the others. Now that he had returned, the aura he exuded naturally caused Taitsong to recall the past. So that's how it is. Lu Bai looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. He possessed all of Taichu's memories, and now that the present and the past were connected, he suddenly understood what he had been unable to understand. No wonder there were 2 people who looked exactly the same back then. That was the desolation from the past. Tai Tsong suddenly understood, but his face turned red. He did not forget how Yi Xian had tricked him when he was young. He had almost been tricked to death by Yi Xian. Should we call you Desolation, or should we call you Yi Xian? Lu Bai asked with a complicated expression. Desolation has passed away. There is only Yi Xian in this world, just like how Tai Chu disappeared. There is only you, Brother Bai, in this world. Yi Xian looked at Lu Bai with a serious expression. He hoped he could make him understand himself and not be misled by Tai Chu's memories. Lu Bai was silent. How could he not understand what Yi Xian meant? However, he was different from Yi Xian. In this life, he had not walked his own path. He had recovered his cultivation base as a primordial god king. His memories had merged with Tai Chu's, making it impossible for him to tell which was the real him. When he saw Tai Chu's confused expression, Yi Xian sighed inwardly. Lu Bai could only rely on himself to understand himself. No one could help him. Has the Chaos Verse entered the 12th period? Yi Xian changed the topic and looked at the two of them solemnly. 10 more years. Tai Tsong regained his composure and answered Yi Xian's question. 10 more years. Yi Xian nodded slightly. It seemed that only a few 100 million years had passed since he had returned to the past. In 10 more years, the 12th period would begin, which was also the final period. The 12th period. This was very important to Yi Xian, because in the 12th period, the final cauldron would be born. Yi Xian needed to find this cauldron, because the keys to opening the gate of reincarnation were the 12 cauldrons, the ancient bronze scripture, and the heavenfall halberd. Moreover, at the end of the 12th period, the apocalyptic tribulation would descend, and the gate of reincarnation would reappear. This was Yi Xian's era, the era in which he had been born. Only by breaking the curse of the apocalyptic cycle and opening the gate of reincarnation would he be able to unravel the ultimate secrets of the eternal universe. Time was of the essence. There was only one period left. Yi Xian needed to find the final cauldron and combine the 3 lifetimes before the apocalyptic tribulation descended. He needed to truly create the most powerful art of all time. Everything had come to an end, and everything would end there. Yi Xian did not know whether he would succeed or fail. He only knew that he needed to make ample preparations to face whatever was about to happen. Buzz. Suddenly, just as the 3 of them were conversing, the entire Chaos Verse suddenly darkened. A pair of eyes as deep as the abyss appeared, staring down at Yi Xian and the others from above. Thump, thump, thump. It was as if the universe itself was shaking, as if the stars of eternity were falling. A dark abyss covered the entire Chaos Verse, and a dark figure walked out of it. With every step he took, he approached Yi Xian and the others. The abyss. He was like the heavens and the earth, the sole ruler of all time. Abyss's face was cold, and the power of Abyss swirled around him. He didn't release any terrifying aura, but his appearance caused the entire Chaos Verse to freeze. Chapter 1934. You're finally back. The Abyss slowly walked through the ancient sky until he arrived at the starry sky where Yi Xian was. His pair of abyss-like eyes were staring at him. Abyss, kill him. At the same time, Prison also appeared in this part of the universe. He stared at Yi Xian with a ferocious expression, his eyes overflowing with murderous intent. Clearly, Yi Xian had just returned to the present chaotic universe. If Lu Bai and Tai Tsong could sense his return, so could Abyss and Prison. Interesting. You can't wait to find me. It seems that you're very confident in killing me. Yi Xian wasn't surprised by Abyss's appearance. However, Yi Xian hadn't expected Abyss to appear in front of him as soon as he returned to the present. I once said that even if you return to the past and become a terrifying land of doom, you're still no match for me, Abyss said proudly. Yuan said arrogantly. His unparalleled confidence was evident. Compared to his past self, the Yuan of the future was much calmer, but he was still arrogant and confident. Looking at Abyss's proud posture, Yi Xian smiled faintly. It seems that you've forgotten how you became a dog and how I trampled on you. You really don't learn from your mistakes. Boom. As soon as Yi Xian said that, Abyss's calm and arrogant expressions suddenly changed. Even the heavenly abyss power around him became extremely chaotic. He looked at Yi Xian with extreme shock. It's you? Abyss's eyes turned crimson and his face flushed. He looked at Yi Xian with shock, shame, and anger. He instantly understood something. It's me. I am Desolation, and Desolation is me, Yi Xian said with a smile. You. Yuan's body and mind violently trembled. His face was extremely purple, and the shame and indignation in his eyes were on the verge of bursting out. His trembling finger pointed at Yi Xian, and his entire mood underwent an extreme change. Abyss's life was full of pride, but his greatest stain was being trampled on and humiliated by Desolation. He was even turned into a dog and trampled on. His pride was trampled on. Even in the battle between the two of them, he still lost to Desolation in one move. Even though losing to Huang was the hatred he felt inside, being humiliated like a dog, this was the greatest humiliation and pain he felt inside. Other than Desolation and absolute beginning, only he knew about this matter. He had never told anyone about this matter. But today, Yi Xian actually exposed the humiliation he suffered all those years ago. It was as if Yi Xian had stabbed a knife into his heart and even sprinkled a handful of salt on it. So that's how it is. So you are Desolation. No wonder, Abyss roared in shame and anger. His terrifying killing intent overflowed. He couldn't remain calm when he looked at Yi Xian. There was only world-shaking killing intent. Abyss, what did he say? Prison looked at him blankly. It collided with Abyss's strike. When the two attacks collided, they exploded with unparalleled light that seemed capable of piercing through the entire Chaosverse. The power of this attack was simply unimaginable. Rumble. Countless stars were reduced to dust, and the waves of stars were reduced to water vapor. The terrifying power of the attack even affected the operation of the Chaosverse. The two of them were sent flying. They didn't continue fighting. Instead, a hint of hesitation appeared on their faces. Clearly, the chaotic universe of the future was too weak. It couldn't be compared to the three great eras. If the two of them really did fight, the entire chaotic universe would explode before the outcome could be determined. It was the end of the 11th period. The 12th period was about to begin. The chaotic universe of this life was about to end. The gate of reincarnation would reappear. This was the final battle as well as the final transcendence. Whether it was Yi Xian or Abyss, they were both waiting for this final moment. Thus, the two of them had some misgivings and didn't dare to use their full strength. But Abyss didn't want to give up. He didn't want to let Yi Xian go. He had to settle the score for the humiliation he had suffered in the ancient era. Chapter 1935. Desolation. Do you dare to enter the void and fight me? Abyss held his hands behind his back as he arrogantly looked down at Yi Xian. The heavenly abyss powers around him slowly bloomed as he looked at Yi Xian with contempt. All right, I also want to see how much stronger you have become after all these years. Yi Xian took a step forward and soared into the sky. He casually tore open a void rift as a terrifying black hole appeared. Then he entered the black hole without any hesitation. At least you have some guts. Abyss sneered as his figure flashed and entered the black hole. As the two entered the void to fight, Lu Bai and Tai Tsong exchanged looks before entering as well. Prison naturally did not want to fall behind as he entered at the same moment. Land of nothingness. As the name implied, it was a void. Nothing existed there. It was infinitely vast, and there was no concept of time. This was a place where one could fight to the fullest, without affecting the Chaosverse outside. This was a place where one could fight to the fullest extent possible. Bam, bam, bam. The void stirred as light and shadows intersected, erupting with extremely terrifying powers. The moment Yi Xian and Abyss entered, they began fighting without any nonsense. I don't care if you are Desolation or Yi Xian. Today, I'll let you experience what it means to be better off dead. Boom, 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 boom. Abyss punched Yi Xian again and again. Every punch contained a terrifying power. The power looked like the 9 Tribulations' heavenly abyss art, but it did not seem like it. It was more like a power that exceeded the 9 Tribulations' heavenly abyss art. Bam! Yi Xian was also fighting back crazily. The Dharma and Tao of his two lives were circulating crazily. The desolate heaven dharma and heaven burial art advanced together as one terrifying technique after another was mercilessly cast. However, something that shocked Yi Xian appeared. All of his methods were useless against Abyss. Not a single one of his attacks was negated by Abyss. Instead, Abyss became stronger and stronger as he fought. Boom! A terrifying thing happened. Abyss' hands seemed to be holding up the world. The dark abyss above his head was spinning terrifyingly, pouring out beams of dark light that surrounded him like the Milky Way. As if the Milky Way was falling from the ninth heaven, as if a meteor shower was destroying the world, the terrifying black light surrounding Abyss shot towards Yi Xian. Clang, clang. Yi Xian's body shook. The two world techniques and Daos exploded, resisting Abyss's terrifying attacks. He let Abyss's great arts hit him, and there was a deafening roar. Is this all you've got? Yi Xian waved his sleeve, and the terrifying power of desolation swept out, nullifying all the attacks. Huang, it seems like you didn't make much progress. You really have disappointed me too much. Suddenly, Abyss did not continue to attack. Instead, he calmed down and looked at Yi Xian blandly, with a strange, scornful smile on his face. Yi Xian's heart trembled when he saw Abyss's expression. He suddenly had an extremely bad feeling, and even had a feeling that a great danger was attacking him. Abyss could not be so weak. In the next moment, Yi Xian's body retreated rapidly, and there was a serious look in his eyes. The two world techniques and Daos were sublimated, and the light of desolate heaven's reincarnation gathered at his fingertips. It was the strongest attack that defeated Abyss back then. Yi Xian was on high alert, because according to his speculation, the future Abyss could not be the same as when he was young. One should know that Abyss had lived for countless years. Whether it was his cultivation or his own techniques and Daos, he was definitely terrifyingly powerful. Huang, I actually have to thank you. If I did not lose to that one move back then, and if you did not humiliate me, I would not have been able to derive the 9 tribulations Abyss technique to the highest level. Abyss was murmuring coldly. His eyes were rotating as deep as the dark abyss. Even his entire body was giving off an indescribable temperament, and a terrifying aura was flowing slowly. Rumble. In the next moment, an extremely terrifying thing happened. Abyss raised his 5 fingers, and the dark abyss above his head began to hum and spin. The dark abyss turned into a door. Right, a door that caused Yi Xian to be extremely shocked. The door of reincarnation. It was the door of reincarnation that would only appear in the apocalypse. Dark abyss was the crystallization of Abyss's techniques and Daos, but it turned into the door of reincarnation at this moment. But, as black as ink, the door of reincarnation that dark abyss turned into was so black that it was terrifying. The power of reincarnation circled around the door, which added to the terror that had never been seen before. Buzz. Dark reincarnation, sweeping through the ages. The dark reincarnation door was rotating, and the entire void was twisting and shattering. Abyss was high above, and the dark reincarnation door was rotating above his head, giving off an invincible aura. Desolation, I really have to thank you. During the apocalypse, although I didn't break the reincarnation curse, I comprehended the profound of the power of reincarnation. Since then, I cultivated the 9 Calamity Heaven Abyss technique and merged it with the power of reincarnation. That's how I reached the highest level of the 9 Calamity Heaven Abyss technique and turned it into the dark reincarnation that has never been seen before. Abyss stood with his hands behind his back, looking down at Yi Xian from high above. His face was full of pride, and his body radiated an invincible confidence. Impressive. Yi Xian frowned, but he wasn't stingy with his praise. He didn't misjudge Abyss. Abyss's talent was terrifying. Chapter 1936. The dark samsara was capable of obliterating all eternity. This was Abyss' supreme Tao and Tao. In fact, he was confident that when the true gate of reincarnation descended upon the world, his dark cycle of reincarnation would be able to shatter it and truly transcend the chaosverse. This was Abyss' invincible confidence, the result of his countless years of cultivation. Even though Yi Xian had mastered the Tao of 2 lifetimes, Abyss didn't take him seriously at all. Bury the heavens. Yi Xian tapped out with a finger, forcibly combining the Tao of 2 lifetimes into one and unleashing the most powerful attack of his life. Yi Xian transformed into a streak of light, and his most powerful attack landed upon the dark samsara. A blinding light erupted, then fell silent once more. Silence. Silence. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The gate of reincarnation continued to revolve, but Abyss' expression remained calm. Yi Xian, on the other hand, was completely stiff. His brows were tightly knitted together. It's the same move as before. Unfortunately, I'm no longer the same person. Your most powerful attack is useless against me, Abyss sneered. Yi Xian's most powerful attack had been completely useless against his dark samsara. He'd spent countless lifetimes training in the Chaosverse, and had trained the 9 tribulations heaven Abyss to a supreme level. How could he possibly be defeated by a single attack like he had been in the past? Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood, which he viciously wiped away. He raised his head to look at Abyss, his gaze turning profound. He was no match for him. Whether it was in terms of cultivation, Tao, or Tao, Yi Xian was no match for the future Abyss. This was the difference between him and the future Abyss. Do you still remember what I told you when you returned to the past? Even if you transform into a world of absolute devastation, you still won't be a match for me, Abyss sneered. He strode towards Yi Xian, the dark samsara continuing to revolve. He carried with him an aura of eternal invincibility as he sought to suppress Yi Xian. Swoosh. 2 figures suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. They were Lu Bai and Tai Tsang, who had been watching the battle for a long time. They looked at Abyss with heavy hearts. One had to admit that against such a terrifying Abyss, even if the 2 of them worked together, they weren't certain of victory. They might even be defeated by Abyss. However, the 2 of them had to take action because they could not watch Yi Xian be suppressed by Abyss. Either rise and fall, or die. Those who oppose me can only die. Facing the 2 absolute lands, Abyss frowned. The 2 of them were not weak. If they joined forces to fight him, they would give him a lot of pressure. Moreover, although he appeared to be unharmed in that exchange with Yi Xian, he had used the gate of dark samsara and consumed a great deal of his cultivation. He definitely wasn't as unharmed as he appeared. You want to take turns fighting me? Have you asked for my permission? Boom. You came fiercely and faced Lu Bai and Tai Tsang directly. Although his cultivation was the weakest among them, he was still a true absolute earth-shattering expert. 2. Suddenly you growled. A figure quietly appeared beside Abyss. It was the other absolute land Tuesday. At this moment, both sides had 3 people, and Yi Xian's side was obviously at a disadvantage. The atmosphere was extremely oppressive. Lively, it's really lively. If you include me, then all of the heaven-shocking extreme Earths have gathered here today. A faint voice was heard. A milky white figure quietly arrived. As the light dispersed, an elegant and handsome young man appeared. Tribulation, you came at the right time. Today, Abyss is going to become the strongest of all time. Let's give him a hand and completely suppress the 3 of them. As 2 spoke in a cold voice, Tribulation also arrived beside Abyss. The might of the 4 great earth-shattering forces instantly forced Yi Xian and the other 2 to retreat. Desolation, do you see this? Abyss opened his arms and looked up at the starry sky. His entire body showed an incomparable temperament. I am the strongest of all time in the universe. 3 absolute lands follow me because they believe that only I can lead them to transcend the universe, Abyss said proudly. Abyss said proudly. His entire being was filled with invincible confidence. The 3 earth-shattering lands stood beside him. The 4 of them represented the entire ancient era. What should they do? At this moment, Lu Bai and Tai Tsang looked solemn. In an environment where the enemy was strong and they were weak, they had no chance of winning. They were facing 4 absolute lands, and there were only 3 of them. The key problem was that Abyss was too strong. He alone gave them great pressure. Tai Tsang, I can give you a chance to follow me. I believe you are smart and know what to choose. Abyss put his hands behind his back. The dark reincarnation was rotating. After comprehending reincarnation ultimacy and 9 calamity heaven Abyss art, Abyss had become the most terrifying existence in the universe. People of different paths cannot work together. Liu Bai didn't compromise at all. Whether he was absolute beginning or the current Liu Bai, he would never submit to Abyss. We are all absolute lands. Even if you are stronger than us, I'm afraid you don't have the ability to kill us. Tai Tsong, the archaic evil king, was also an extremely arrogant person. He knew Abyss was strong, but he was not afraid. Those who oppose me will die. Boom. Abyss waved his hand, and the 3 absolute lands behind him suddenly moved and attacked Liu Bai and Tai Tsong. Archaic God King art. Tai Evil Heaven art. Rumble. The God King and the Evil King burst out with endless power. The archaic calamity light and archaic God light shone together, reflecting the most terrifying art, and went straight to the 3 absolute lands. Bang, bang, bang. The land of nothingness collapsed and reformed, and the terrifying power of the absolute lands exploded. The 5 absolute lands fought together, and the terrifying power they released was comparable to the end of the world. If it was the outside chaotic universe, this chaotic battle alone could destroy the entire chaotic universe, and no living beings would be able to survive. Even the eternal universe could not destroy the absolute lands. Stepping into this realm meant that one could live forever, and they were the most terrifying beings in the eternal universe. It had to be said, the evil king and the god king's cultivation were extremely terrifying. Although they were not as strong as Abyss, they were evenly matched with the 3 absolute lands of the ancient times. The land of nothingness was rioting, and the terrifying power was raging. There were also the roars of the 5 people fighting frantically. At this moment, Yi Xian looked calm, and his eyes were deep and dark. He had been severely injured by the dark samsara, and his injuries had just stabilized, so he did not participate in this battle. Moreover, Yi Xian knew who his opponent was because Abyss was walking towards him step by step. Huang, admit defeat. Kneel at my feet and be a dog. This is your only way out. Chapter 1937. He only wanted to take revenge on Yi Xian. He wanted to return all the humiliation that Yi Xian had inflicted on him back to Yi Xian. He wanted to return it 10-fold or even 100-fold. Only then could he resolve the hatred in his heart. The dark samsara gate was spinning. The samsara mysteries combined with the power of heaven Abyss allowed Abyss to display his invincible might. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. There was no fear on his face. Instead, a smile appeared on his face. His smile was sinister and cunning. You appear to be very calm, as if you are very confident in yourself. However, you have forgotten one thing. In the face of absolute power, all schemes and schemes are nothing. This is what you taught me back then. Abyss smiled in disdain. He didn't care if Yi Xian was plotting something. With his current cultivation, any schemes were useless against him. Absolute power? Yi Xian smiled. His smile was filled with disdain as he said, "You're still far from absolute power. Just based on the dark samsara that you deduced, do you really think you're invincible?" Abyss' face turned cold at Yi Xian's contempt. He then sneered, "Desolation, no matter how sharp your tongue is, I will consign you to eternal damnation today." Boom. Abyss raised his 5 fingers, and the terrifying gate of reincarnation rotated in a terrifying manner, bringing with it an unprecedented might as it charged towards Yi Xian to destroy him. Facing Yuan's dark samsara, Yi Xian chose to dodge. He knew from that strike that he wouldn't be a match for Yuan in a head-on battle. Haha. Looking at Yi Xian avoiding the battle, Abyss laughed wildly. "Desolation, aren't you known as the strongest of all time? Why are you running away like a mouse today?" Unfortunately, Yi Xian was indifferent to Abyss' mockery. Instead, he continued to keep a safe distance from Abyss. "Kneel and submit to me." Abyss roared ferociously. He turned into a beam of light, fiercely attacking Yi Xian. The dark reincarnation door moved with him, suppressing Yi Xian. Bang bang bang. Abyss was attacking mercilessly. Dark samsara was smashing down. Yi Xian was using a shocking sacred art to dodge. He didn't want to fight Abyss head-on. Let's see where you can run to. Abyss was chasing after Yi Xian crazily. His face was full of ferocious and excited smiles, as if he was venting the depression he had been feeling for countless years. How many years has it been? Abyss couldn't remember clearly. After he lost to Yi Xian, he worked hard and cultivated bitterly for countless years, all for the sake of mercilessly suppressing Yi Xian today. Moreover, he wanted to wantonly humiliate Yi Xian in order to avenge the great humiliation of the past. At this moment, Abyss was in a great mood. He chased after Yi Xian like a cat toying with a mouse. Every time he attacked, Yi Xian would have to dodge. The Dark Reincarnation contained the profound meaning of reincarnation and his 9 Calamity Abyss technique. It was the strongest technique in Tao of all time. In terms of cultivation, he was above Yi Xian. In terms of technique in Tao, he surpassed Yi Xian. He was high and mighty. He was invincible throughout history. Today, he wanted to ruthlessly trample on Yi Xian and humiliate him. Desolation, what do you have to fight me? Boom, boom, boom. Abyss kept smashing the Dark Reincarnation at Yi Xian. He had an excited and ferocious smile on his face. He even roared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned into a beam of light, as if he didn't exist in the land of nothingness. He allowed Abyss to attack him violently while he dodged miserably. It had to be said that Abyss, who had cultivated the Dark Reincarnation, was too terrifying. Even though Yi Xian had the technique and Tao of 2 lives, he was still suppressed by Abyss. However, Yi Xian seemed to be dodging miserably as if he didn't have the strength to fight back. However, his eyes were abnormally deep and there was a touch of disdain that flashed across his eyes. Yi Xian was waiting for an opportunity that he had set up for eternity. Clang, clang, clang. The entire land of nothingness was being destroyed and restored. A total of 7 shocking absolute Earths were fighting crazily. This was the most terrifying battle. It was also a battle that had never been seen before in the universe. The intensity of the battle was terrifying enough to destroy an era. Abyss, don't waste any more time. Quickly suppress desolation. Yu was crazily attacking Lu Bai as he reminded Abyss. Tu and Jie were also attacking mercilessly. The 3 shocking absolute Earths were fighting Ancient God King Evil King together. They were in a stalemate and obviously needed Abyss help. We need to leave. Lu Bai was the calmest. He retreated as he fought and secretly transmitted his voice to Tai Tsong. Obviously, they had to leave this battlefield when the enemy was strong and they were weak. Although Tai Tsong was extremely evil and arrogant, he wasn't stupid enough to think that he would be a match for Abyss. He inwardly nodded, and together with Lu Bai, they continuously retreated towards Yi Xian's battlefield. It was obvious that they wanted to join forces to escape this place. Although it was a little embarrassing, there was no other way. After all, the 3 of them couldn't defeat the 4 shocking absolute Earths of the ancient times. They want to escape. Tu shouted fiercely as the ancient heaven-slaughtering art erupted. The heaven-slaughtering divine power wanted to stop the 2 of them, but it was offset by Lu Bai's immemorial light of calamity. They can't escape. Yu roared fiercely as the heaven-slaughtering prison was formed, trying to seal the entire land of nothingness. I'll stop them, Jie said indifferently. Tribulation said indifferently. He took a step forward and charged towards Lu Bai and Tai Tsong. His terrifying ancient shocking sky chant was running, and his whole body was flickering. Lu Bai and Tai Tsong were under great pressure immediately. But at this moment, Lu Bai and Tai Tsong had already arrived beside Yi Xian. The 3 of them unleashed their shocking absolute Earths of the ancient times and attacked Abyss together. Facing the joint attack of the 3 shocking absolute Earths, even Abyss didn't dare to take it head-on. He hurriedly dodged the attack, and his whole body was filled with anger and embarrassment. In the next moment, Tribulation appeared beside Yuan in an instant and comforted him. Abyss, don't worry. They can't escape. Jie, seal the land of nothingness. I want to suppress the 3 of them one by one and let them know that I'm the strongest of all time. Pff. Abruptly, Abyss's words came to an abrupt halt. He stared blankly at his chest, only to see a jade-like hand piercing through his chest, still stained with his blood. What? Abyss spat out a mouthful of blood and pulled out the hand that was in his chest. Abyss turned his head with difficulty and saw Jie smiling contemptuously, his hands still stained with his blood. Jie? Are you crazy? The next moment, Tu and Yu came to Abyss's side. They supported Abyss and looked at Jie in horror. They couldn't understand why Jie, who was on their side, would betray them. Chapter 1938. You traitor! What benefits did desolation give you? Prison roared angrily. Tribulation, why did you do this? Tu was heartbroken. He didn't expect that his best friend would betray them at such a critical moment. At this moment, Lu Bai and Tai Tsong were stunned. They were so shocked by this scene that they couldn't speak. They couldn't believe such a big turn of events. Only Yi Xian was calm and composed. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Why did you do this? Tribulation whispered. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood on his palm elegantly. Then he threw it away casually. It's simple. He's just an arrogant and stupid dog. He has unparalleled talent, but he's not very smart. Tribulation muttered contemptuously. Then he came to Yi Xian under Abyss's angry gaze and bowed to Yi Xian. Thank you for your hard work, Yi Xian said with a smile. It's what I should do, Tribulation chuckled. Haha. All of a sudden, a mad laugh of shame and indignation came. Abyss pushed Prison and Tu away fiercely. His eyes were dark and deep. Interesting. It's really interesting. Desolation, you buried such a chess piece beside me for today's battle. Abyss's voice was like an ancient cold river. The bloody hole in his chest was extremely horrible, but he was still glaring at Yi Xian and others. It's because you're so stupid. You can only blame yourself for being too confident. That's why you're being played by me. Yi Xian said indifferently. Then he sneered and said, Didn't I teach you before that all plots and tricks are useless in front of absolute power? Today, I'll teach you again. Don't trust anyone except yourself, because the people who can hurt you are always the people closest to you. I hope you'll remember this lesson. Good. Abyss was so angry that he laughed. He was taught a lesson by Yi Xian again. He couldn't bear this kind of humiliation. His aura became extremely violent and fierce. Despicable. A dignified extreme Earth Master actually used such a despicable method. Prison roared hatefully and even scolded Yi Xian righteously. Clearly, he was exasperated. Yi Xian smiled disdainfully. He completely ignored Yu's curses. It was impossible for Yi Xian to feel the slightest bit ashamed. What was despicable? In Yi Xian's life creed, there was no such thing as despicable. There were only 4 words. Winner takes all. History was written by the victors. Whether it was despicable or dirty, it was only a necessary stage to become a victor. Those peerless heroes who were eulogized seemed to be glorious and magnificent, but behind their glory and magnificence, how many despicable and dirty things had they done? Yi Xian had lived for countless years. He knew this very well. No one's success was honorable. The road to success was filled with all kinds of filthy things. However, when a person succeeded, they would write justice for themselves. This was the so-called winner takes all. To put it bluntly, when a person succeeded, what people saw was his success. As for how many despicable and dirty things he had done on the road to success, it would just be an understatement. The strong made history and the weak were as lowly as dogs. Yi Xian didn't care about the so-called benevolence, righteousness, and morality. He only cared about himself. As long as he could achieve his goal, he would naturally do anything. Rumble. At this moment, the situation was reversed. Lu Bai, absolute beginning, tribulation, and Yi Xian. The 4 great forces stood side by side. The aura they exuded distorted and shattered the entire void. The terrifying pressure of the 4 great forces pressed down on Yuan. He was hit in the heart and was seriously injured. Although Yu and Tu were great forces, they were nothing in front of Yi Xian and the others. Huang, do you think you've won? Boom. Suddenly, Yuan took a step forward. Surrounded by the power of heavenly yuan, his furious expression calmed down. His eyes rotated strangely, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Yi Xian frowned. His mind suddenly tightened, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. Huang, I'm not as good as you in terms of conspiracy theory. Buzz. Something terrible happened. It spoke calmly. He was so calm that it was terrifying. The most terrifying thing was that when he spoke, the bloody hole in his chest healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The terrifying dark samsara condensed above his head again. Moreover, this time, Abyss was glowing. The light was dark and terrifying, as if it was going to devour the entire land of nothingness. But it wasn't over yet. The dark samsara above his head turned upside down and began to merge with his body. Huang, do not forget that you previously told me that before absolute power, all schemes and schemes are nothing more than a joke. Do you really think that just because you placed a chess piece at my side, you can deliver me a fatal blow? Rumble. Terrifying ripples spread out from Abyss' body, causing the entire void to shatter and tremble. This extremely powerful force caused Yi Xian and the others to be extremely shocked. Huang, let me tell you something. I have long broken through half a step into transcendence, already breaking free from the heaven-shocking danger realm. I am only half a step away from entering a realm that has never existed since ancient times. That heart-piercing strike just now was indeed formidable, but unfortunately, it still couldn't injure me. Yuan floated up. The dark samsara merged with him. He held his hands behind his back and looked down on the world. His dark eyes looked down at Yi Xian and the others. Half a step away from transcendence? Not only Yi Xian's expression changed, but even Lu Bai and the others were shocked. A depressing will rose in everyone's heart. Invincible. Truly invincible. At this moment, everyone had a feeling that before Yuan, they couldn't raise their fighting spirit. They felt that they were extremely small. I call this realm half a step away from eternity. Throughout history, no one in the universe has ever stepped into this realm. I am the first to do so. Yuan looked down on the world. He was like the brightest star in the universe. Everything in the universe was dim before him. He's taken that crucial step. Tai Tsang trembled. Even though he was extremely ferocious, he was terrified when he felt the aura of Yuan, who was half a step away from eternity. Half a step away from eternity? Yi Xian frowned. His eyes were extremely depressed. After 10 breaths, he calmed down. There was no longer any ripples on his face. Chapter 1939. It's indestructible and everlasting. It's called the sky-shocking impasse. Transcending eternity and immortality is called the eternal realm, Abyss said proudly. Abyss said proudly. He was the first to reach this level, and he was definitely the strongest in the eternal universe. After countless years of bitter cultivation, Abyss was the only one who had entered this realm with the greatest talent of all time. Eternal. Yi Xian took a step forward as a disdainful smile appeared on his face. You're only half a step into the eternal realm. You're still far away from the real eternal realm. Yi Xian always knew that there was a realm above the sky-shocking impasse, which was the so-called transcendence. Yi Xian had to admit that he admired Abyss a lot. It was really unprecedented that he could reach the sky-shocking impasse. Unfortunately, in Yi Xian's opinion, even if Abyss reached the sky-shocking impasse, he was still far away from the real eternal realm. Half-step. This was just a glimpse of the eternal realm. Abyss cultivation was between the sky-shocking impasse and the eternal realm. To put it bluntly, he was still at the sky-shocking impasse. However, at this moment, Abyss was terrifyingly powerful. If Yi Xian was right, Tribulation's heart-piercing attack did not work because Abyss had reached the sky-shocking impasse. From this, it could be seen that even though Abyss hadn't truly transcended, he was already ahead of everyone else. Desolation, you're right. I'm still far away from the eternal realm. However, no matter how sharp your tongue is, no matter how vicious your schemes are, in front of me, a sky-shocking impasse, you can only become a noisy dog. Boom. Abyss raised his 5 fingers as if he was lifting the entire eternal universe. The power that surpassed the eternal universe was condensing an unimaginable power. Suppress. Buzz. Something terrible happened. A huge dark abyss appeared and crashed toward Yi Xian and the others. The great power of the sky-shocking impasse made Yi Xian and the others feel extremely heavy. Open! Yi Xian and the other three shouted fiercely. They raised their arms and tried to lift up the heaven abyss. However, Yi Xian and the other three trembled because the heaven abyss they were lifting was as heavy as the universe. It was about to crush them alive. The spines of Yi Xian's group of four bent, and they couldn't even straighten their knees. The half-step eternal realm's cultivation was simply unfathomable. It was a kind of power between the eternal realm and the heaven-shaking absolute ground, giving them a terrifying pressure. Strong. Too strong. Even Yi Xian didn't think that the abyss would be so terrifying. Although he was only at the half-step eternal realm, he had already begun to crush the four heaven-shaking extremities. For Yi Xian and the other three, this was simply an unprecedented catastrophe. Never before. Ever since the three great eras, there had never been a single person who could suppress the four earth-shattering lands. The power that Abyss displayed today was truly shocking. Our king is invincible. Abyss King is unparalleled. Tu and Yu roared excitedly. They had witnessed Abyss's power with their own eyes, and their eyes were filled with reverence. Kneel. It was as if the heavens and the earth were roaring. Abyss stood proudly in the air, overlooking the world. His eyes were contemptuous and indifferent. His voice rumbled in the ears of Yi Xian and the other three. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of bones cracking was incessant. Yi Xian and the other three's knees were horribly bent. They were about to kneel under Abyss's suppression. Ancient God King Arts. Supreme Evil Firmament Art. Ancient Heaven-Shocking Art. Desolate Heaven Reincarnation. Yi Xian and the other three were all heaven-shaking extremities. They naturally had their own pride. Even if they were no match for Abyss, they would never kneel before him. At this moment, the four of them sublimated to the extreme, erupting with earth-shattering power. Each of them performed their strongest blow, shattering the heaven abyss that was suppressing them. The void twisted and shattered. Yi Xian and the other three were sent flying because Abyss's half-step eternal cultivation was too terrifying. It was not only the suppression of cultivation, but also the suppression of arts and Daos. Abyss was half a realm higher than them, but it was enough to crush them. Stubborn resistance. Are you tired of living? Dong, dong, dong. Abyss strolled across the sky. Every step he took shook the world. Terrifying ripples spread under his feet. The entire land of nothingness was shattering. Let's fight him. At this critical moment, Tai Tsung roared ferociously. Lu Bai's face was cold and fierce. They were ready to fight. Half-step eternal, the difference between heaven and earth. Don't throw your lives away. Suddenly, without waiting for Tai Tsung and Lu Bai to risk their lives, Yi Xian took a step forward and blocked their path. His expression was calm, and only his eyes flickered violently. You? Lu Bai and Tai Tsung were stunned. They did not understand why Yi Xian stopped them. Didn't he know that the only way was to fight with his life? Don't worry. With me here, he can't do anything. Yi Xian patted the two of them on the shoulders and gave them a calm look before turning around to look at the abyss. Desolation, are you still not going to admit defeat? Abyss said indifferently. He was already high and mighty, completely regarding Yi Xian as an ant. Only he knew the difference between half-step eternal and earth-shattering. Yi Xian clapped his hands and praised, I really didn't misjudge you. You were actually able to cultivate to such a level. This is indeed not within my expectations. Looking at Yi Xian's calm expression, Abyss' heart skipped a beat, and a heavy look flashed in his eyes. He knew Yi Xian a little. After all, he had suffered a lot because of Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian looked calm and composed, which made Abyss unable to see through Yi Xian. Suddenly, he felt a little uneasy. You think you can scare me with your pretentious act? Abyss said coldly. However, he did not attack Yi Xian because the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. Are you curious as to why? tribulation, betrayed you? Yi Xian lightly smiled as if he was chatting about family matters. But Abyss was really curious, so he could not help but ask. The reason is simple. Because he is me and I am him. Yi Xian gave a strange smile. What happened in the next moment caused everyone to be stunned on the spot, especially Abyss, whose expression became extremely unsightly. Buzz. Unknowingly, Tribulation had quietly appeared beside Yi Xian. His appearance was changing, and his master had transformed into another Yi Xian. His entire body emitted a shocking luster. In this life, I've finally waited for this day. Tribulation nodded and smiled at Yi Xian. Welcome back. Yi Xian stretched out his arms. Tribulation's figure disappeared until it turned into a shadow. He walked into Yi Xian's body and completely merged with Yi Xian. Chapter 1940. In the next moment, something terrifying happened. Clang, clang. Yi Xian's body glowed as three unfathomable techniques and dahas shot out from the top of his head, transforming into three phantoms that condensed above his head. These were the Dharma and Tao of Yi Xian's 3 lifetimes. At that moment, they had reached greater mastery. The terrifying power that erupted from them made Yi Xian's aura soar. The Dharma and Tao of the 3 lifetimes turned into a tricolored light that surged back into Yi Xian's head. In the next moment, Yi Xian's body trembled as a terrifying aura that surpassed the absolute land erupted. Half step to eternal realm. Boom. Yi Xian's body shook as his black robe fluttered without any wind. His 3,000 strands of hair fluttered in the wind as terrifying ripples spread out in all directions. That inexplicably terrifying aura actually forced the heavens and earth to uncontrollably retreat. Desolate heaven Dharma, heaven-burying mantra, heaven-shocking mantra. When the Dharma and Tao of the 3 lifetimes were contained in his body, it pushed Yi Xian's realm to the half-step to eternal realm. The power of the 3 lifetimes was unimaginable. You? Yuan roared in shock as he stared at Yi Xian. He could not believe his eyes as he sensed a great threat approaching him. 3 lifetimes in one. It's 3 lifetimes in one? Tai Tsong roared in shock as a dazzling light burst out from his eyes. You're wrong. It's not 3 lifetimes in one. He has only contained the Dharma and Tao of the 3 lifetimes in his body. Even so, he has reached the half-step to eternal realm, Lu Bai said. You have a great plan. In the next moment, Yuan roared in shock. As one of the strongest people in the eternal universe, he could see Yi Xian's scheming and means at a glance. From the primordial age to the present, Yuan Xian had been cultivating the Dharma and Tao of the 3 lifetimes. It was terrifying and crazy. In terms of talent, Yuan was definitely not inferior to Yi Xian. Naturally, he had thought of reincarnating and cultivating again. However, in the end, he gave up because this path was too dangerous. It could be said that there was no chance of survival. Yuan never would have thought that Yi Xian would actually succeed in walking this path. Moreover, he'd already perfected his cultivation for 3 lifetimes. Terrifying. Madness. He was really a madman. This was shocked, ashamed, and resentful. He believed that he was unprecedented, walking in front of everyone, but only today did he discover that the one walking at the very front was actually still Huang. As a supreme being of the eternal universe, Abyss understood Yi Xian's goal all too well. At this moment, the 3 lifetimes of magic and Tao had reached perfection, allowing Yi Xian to become half a step into the eternal realm. As long as he could combine the 3 lifetimes and combine the 3 types of magic and Tao into one, he would be able to create the strongest technique of all time, which was also the so-called true transcendent technique. That kind of courage and strong will made Abyss feel ashamed and resentful. Yi Xian's talent was indeed inferior to his, but he'd schemed for an eternity and walked on such a path of death. In the end, he'd cultivated the Tao of 3 lifetimes. The dangers and conviction he'd experienced during this process were simply unimaginable to him. Past, present, and future. 3 illusory figures revolved around Yi Xian's body, causing his entire body to seem illusory, giving off a blurry and illusory feeling. This was the condensation of the 3 lives cultivation and Tao. It was also Yi Xian's strongest moment. Boom, 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 boom. The three lives cultivation and Tao were intertwining. It was like three lights were intertwining. The power that leaked out was too shocking. It made the entire land of nothingness collapse. Whether it is the past, present, or future, you can only be below me. And I will be your eternal nightmare. Yi Xian stood with his hands behind his back. His black clothes fluttered slightly. His hair fluttered without wind. His voice echoed in the land of nothingness like a curse. Ha ha. Abyss laughed. He laughed wildly as if he had heard the funniest joke. Desolation. Abyss raised his hand and pointed at Yi Xian. His face began to distort. He said fiercely, even if you have cultivated the three lives cultivation and Tao, you and I are both half-step eternal realm. Do you really think I will lose to you? Then let's try. Boom. Yi Xian did not waste any more words. His 5 fingers slammed down on Abyss. The three lives cultivation and Tao burst out at the same time, intertwining with dazzling and explosive light. The attack seemed ordinary, but it had the meaning of returning to the original state. The attack had gone beyond the power of the eternal universe. It was too horrible to look at. Darkness. Abyss turned into a dark samsara. His whole body was twisting. Yi Xian's attack was completely swallowed by him. The samsara light flashed violently, and a heavenly abyss world-destroying power blasted toward Yi Xian. Bang! With a punch, Abyss exploded. Yi Xian's entire body was glowing. This punch of his didn't have any tricks. It was just the simplest punch, but it exploded with a power that had never existed since ancient times. Both of them roared at the same time. They were both half-step eternal realm existences. At this moment, neither of them would hold back. They only wanted to suppress the other on the spot. Bang! Fist and elbow collided. The void exploded. Their bodies slammed into each other. The resulting ripples of power broke the void and affected the chaotic universe outside. Boom! The stars in the outside world were exploding, and a crack that stretched for trillions of miles appeared. The entire chaos-verse was trembling, proving just how terrifying the two's attack was. Seal! Lu Bai and the others' expressions changed. Then, they all took action to stabilize the void. Obviously, no one wanted to see their battle destroy the chaotic universe outside. Desolation, you are no match for me. Then let's see if you have the ability. Bang! 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 Dark Samsara, the power of 3 worlds. Yi Xian and Abyss fought fiercely. Every attack represented the strongest power in the eternal universe. At this moment, the more they fought, the more ruthless they became. They were extremely ruthless. They both wanted to kill each other. This battle was so fierce that it could be called the most powerful battle in the eternal universe. There were no secret techniques or divine abilities, nor were there any flashy lights. There was only the collision of the Tao and the Tao. The man was the law, and the law was the man. At this moment, the two of them weren't competing on whose divine abilities and secret arts were stronger. They weren't competing on whose cultivation was stronger. Instead, they were competing on whose arts and Tao were superior. They were both half-step eternal realm, only half a step away from breaking through to the eternal realm. The two of them turned into law and Tao, colliding fiercely like 2 light balls until they completely crushed each other. Bang! 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 They were brutal and violent. There was no pattern. There was only endless collision, but it was also the simplest way to fight. At their level, no fancy means had any effect. Only in this way could they really defeat each other. In the endless collision, Yi Xian's body glowed brighter and brighter. He seemed to have turned into a light ball and crazily hit Abyss. Chapter 1941. Abyss did the same. He lunged at Yi Xian crazily, smashing his elbow at Yi Xian's head. Fists and palms intertwined, causing endless rumbling sounds. The battle lasted for half a year, but there was still no clear winner. Based on the way they fought, there would be no progress even if they fought for thousands of years. Bang! An ancient sound of thunder exploded, and the two were sent flying. They quickly stabilized themselves and looked at each other from afar. A mouthful of blood spurted out of Abyss' mouth, mixed with terrifying essence energy. On the other side, Yi Xian was not having a good time either. His chest had caved in, and the three realms technique and Tao were repairing his body. Abyss was really strong. Even with Yi Xian's three realms technique and Tao, he was not at a disadvantage. Desolation, it's time to end this. Abyss roared fiercely, and his expression gradually became solemn. The dark light of reincarnation made him illusory, and he began to turn into a gate of reincarnation. Reincarnation, reincarnation. This was the highest level of the 9 Calamity Abyss technique, and also Abyss's strongest state. Obviously, he wanted to end the battle with one blow. Be careful! Lu Bai's expression was heavy as he loudly reminded Yi Xian. This was because he could already feel the will of the Abyss. The next attack would definitely determine the victor. Without Lu Bai's warning, Yi Xian's aura became obscure. The three realms technique and Tao were flickering on his body, and a great power was growing in his body. Facing this final blow, Yi Xian's heart was heavy. He was forcibly fusing the three realms technique and Tao together to suppress Abyss with one blow. But Yi Xian knew very well that forcibly fusing the three realms technique and Tao was extremely difficult for him, and there was even the danger of a backlash. 3 realms in one was not that simple. It was a power beyond the eternal universe, the so-called eternal realm. Yi Xian was far from reaching this level, but he could only forcefully fuse a trace of the 3 worlds' profound meaning to unleash his strongest attack. The Tao of the 3 realms. Since ancient times, who can rival it? Rumble! Yi Xian roared at the sky. The terrifying tricolored light flickered crazily on his body, faintly wanting to fuse together. Yi Xian's body was bursting with eternal light. This kind of light had never been seen before. It was formed by Yi Xian's forceful fusion of the 3 realms technique and Tao. The ages trembled and the void exploded. Terrifying ripples spread out from Yi Xian's body. Just his aura alone was enough to make everyone present retreat in fear. Dark Samsara, only king of all ages. His entire body had transformed into the dark gate of Samsara. At this moment, the gate of Samsara was wide open, and it was spinning in a terrifying manner as it charged towards Yi Xian to devour him. Kill! Boom! Yi Xian no longer held back. He turned into a ray of light, the eternal light of the heavens, and charged toward the dark portal of reincarnation. In the next moment, time stopped. Time stagnated. Even the earth-shattering experts could not move or speak. Yi Xian's eternal light entered the dark portal of reincarnation. The terrifying dark portal of reincarnation rotated as though it was going to obliterate the eternal universe. The portal of reincarnation rotated and darkness grew. No one knew what was happening, but the dark portal of reincarnation was buzzing violently. Inside the portal of reincarnation, the eternal light flickered violently. In an instant, heaven and earth lost their color and the eternal void. A glaring brilliance lit up the entire void. The earth-shattering experts could not open their eyes. Everything returned to calm. After an unknown period of time. Perhaps it was an instant, or perhaps it was an eternity. Lu Bai and the rest's eyelids trembled. Their stagnant thoughts started to work again. They finally opened their eyes and saw the changes in the void. 2 figures appeared, but no one could bear to look at them directly. Yi Xian. His body cracked like a spider web and blood spurted out from all parts of his body. He looked like a broken piece of jade that was about to explode. On the other side, Abyss. He was still in the void. His entire body seemed to be safe and sound, but a crack had appeared between his eyebrows and was spreading to his entire body at an extremely fast speed. Boom. In the next moment, there was an explosion. Abyss's body exploded. The flesh and blood that splattered out was extremely glaring. His entire body exploded in the void. Abyss! Such a scene shocked you and two so much that they roared in grief. They couldn't believe that the invincible Abyss had actually been defeated by Yi Xian. Are you okay? Lu Bai and Tai Tsong instantly appeared beside Yi Xian. Looking at Yi Xian's cracked body, they were both moved. I'm fine. Blood flowed from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. At this moment, his injuries were extremely severe. Not only was he injured by the dark samsara of the abyss, but also because of the backlash he suffered from forcefully fusing the three realms technique and the Tao. Is he dead? Taiyong looked around the void with a heavy look in his eyes. Buzz. As soon as Tai Tsong said that, Abyss's flesh and blood started to gather back together. Suddenly, Abyss's face took shape. Abyss! You and two were overjoyed. Lu Bai and Tai Tsong's expressions changed. They did not expect Abyss to still be alive. Desolation. Abyss's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. There was no trace of blood on his face. There was no powerful aura around him. Although he had reassembled his body, he had only managed to preserve his life. His divine soul had been shattered. He had almost been killed by Yi Xian. However, cultivating to half-step eternal was enough to be called immortal. Even if Yi Xian shattered his dark wheel with a single strike, he still wouldn't be able to truly kill him. This was the terror of half-step eternal. Buzz. Yi Xian's body trembled. His cracked body was also recovering rapidly. He was in a much better condition than Abyss. He could still use some of his cultivation. Abyss, on the other hand, was in a much worse state. He could not even use his cultivation. I've said it before. Whether in the past, present, or future, you can only be below me, Yi Xian said calmly. I've lost. Abyss no longer had any pride. He looked at Yi Xian in a daze. Although he was unwilling to admit defeat, he admitted defeat to Yi Xian. Let's kill him. Boom. Lu Bai and Tai Tsong's killing intense sword. They wanted to destroy Abyss's body and soul while he was at his weakest. How dare you? You and two stepped forward and protected Abyss behind them. Obviously, they would not sit back and watch Abyss die in the hands of Lu Bai and Tai Tsong. You can't kill him. Even if you kill him now, he can reassemble his divine soul and reappear in the world. Yi Xian waved his hand and stopped the two. They were both half-step eternal experts. Although Abyss had been defeated by him and had his dark samsara destroyed, half-step eternal experts were truly immortal and indestructible. Chapter 1942. Even if his divine soul and body were shattered, his half-step eternal law and Tao could still reassemble his divine soul and body. This was the terror of a half-step eternal realm expert. If one wanted to kill a half-step eternal realm expert, only a true eternal realm expert could do it. Lu Bai and Tai Xian's shocking cultivation couldn't really kill him. Desolation, this is the second time I've lost to you. But the grudge between us isn't over yet. Although I lost to you, I'll definitely take the last step in the transcendent realm before you. Yuan was supported by Yu and Tuesday. He stared fixedly at Yi Xian as he spoke in a weak voice. You want to take the last step? I'm afraid you don't have the ability. Yi Xian smiled faintly and ruthlessly attacked Yuan. Let's wait and see. Yuan clenched his teeth and asked Yu and Tu to tear open the void. The three of them wanted to leave this place. You want to leave just like that? Suddenly, without waiting for Abyss to leave, Yi Xian's ice-cold voice sounded out. This instantly caused Abyss's expression to change, and it caused Yu and Tu's hearts to tighten. In the next moment, Lu Bai and Tai Tsong blocked their way, their eyes filled with ferocity. Desolation, even if you kill me, I'll be resurrected. Yuan growled angrily. I naturally know that I can't kill you, but I can seal you forever. Yi Xian slowly walked in front of the Abyss, and looked down at him with a condescending gaze. You! Yuan's face turned pale, and fear flashed in his eyes. He knew Yi Xian wasn't a gentleman. Instead, he was more like a despicable villain. His methods were vicious and terrifying. Obviously, it was impossible for him to leave just like that. What do you want? Yuan could only lower his head and stare at Yi Xian hatefully. I like smart people. Although your pride makes you look no different from a stupid dog, I still admire your aptitude and cultivation. Yi Xian lightly said. What are you trying to say? Although Abyss was arrogant, he was not stupid. Yi Xian had stopped him and did not attack him. Clearly, he had other intentions. Yi Xian smiled. He smiled very calmly and went straight to the point. I can let you go, but you have to do two things for me. As long as you do these two things, I will naturally let you go. Are you threatening me? Abyss growled angrily. His eyes turned blood red. He could not understand why Yi Xian was always riding on his head and letting him do whatever he wanted. Do you think I'm not qualified to threaten you? Yi Xian smiled coldly as he looked at you and two and said, just the two people by your side can't stop the three of us, right? Besides, you can't even use your cultivation right now. Do you think I have the right to threaten you? Hearing Yi Xian's words, Abyss clenched his fists. Veins popped out on his forehead. His chest was about to explode from anger. However, he had to lower his head when he was under someone else's roof. He could only compromise. There was nothing he could do about it. Alright, I agree. Tell me, what do you want me to do for you? Abyss said coldly. Hee. Yi Xian lightly smiled with a kind expression on his face. He slowly walked over to Abyss's side, causing you and two to look at each other nervously. However, Yi Xian ignored them and patted Abyss's shoulder affectionately. These two things are not difficult. Just help me save some people. Who do you want to save? Abyss pulled away Yi Xian's hand and kept a distance from Yi Xian. He hated Yi Xian's affectionate attitude. In ancient times, whenever Yi Xian showed this kind of attitude, he would be in trouble. Abyss had already experienced it. I need you to help me save Xiao, Yi Xian said solemnly. As Yi Xian's words fell, before Abyss could say anything, Tai Tsong's breathing became chaotic. His face turned red and his eyes were filled with excitement. Yes, how could he forget? Xiao had fallen into an eternal slumber. Perhaps only Yi Xian and Abyss could wake her up. Both of them were half-step Eternal Realm experts. If they worked together, they might be able to wake Xiao up. Alright, I'll agree to this. Abyss did not waste any time and agreed. After all, he was defeated by Yi Xian and was threatened by him. Human world, Heartbroken Mountain, land of origin. In this small world, there were 6 earth-shattering lands of extremists. Instead of 6 earth-shattering lands of extremists, there were 7 of them gathered in one place. Xiao was sleeping in an ancient bronze coffin. Together with her existence, all the earth-shattering lands of extremists from the 3 great eras were gathered here. Except for Tribulation, who was Yi Xian's future self and had merged with Yi Xian, everyone else represented an era. Buzz. The coffin slowly opened, and Xiao appeared before everyone's eyes. She was still sleeping as if she would never wake up. Just like in the past, Xiao's appearance did not change at all. She even had a smile on her face in her sleep. Is this goddess Xiao? Abyss looked at the girl in the coffin indifferently. There was no change in his expression. In the 3 great eras, only one woman had turned into a earth-shattering land of extremists. This was very rare in Abyss's eyes. There's only a trace of her divine soul left. She's just a living dead now. It's indeed difficult to revive her. As a half-step Eternal Realm existence, Abyss's vision was very sharp. He saw Xiao's situation at a glance and made a conclusion. Desolation, you want to save her? Abyss frowned and said, yes, this is my promise to her. Tai Tsong has also waited for countless years, Yi Xian said in a deep voice. However, you must know that she is a heaven-shaking extinction ground. Her divine soul is different from that of ordinary people. Right now, her divine soul is shattered and only a sliver is left. If you want to reform her divine soul with our strength, we only have a 50% chance of success. Furthermore, we will fall into a weakened state. Abyss did not want to waste the cultivation he had just recovered. It should be known that saving the girl in the coffin was not only a matter of cultivation consumption, but also his divine soul would be affected. So, are you going to save her or not? Yi Xian said coldly. Feeling Yi Xian's unfriendly and threatening tone, Abyss was angry. He wanted to lose his temper, but he restrained himself. Since I've promised you, I'll save her, Abyss said coldly. Then he raised his 5 fingers, and the light of the dark samsara bloomed and drowned Xiao. You? Tai Tsong's expression changed. He was afraid that Abyss would harm Xiao, so he hurried to stop him. Chapter 1943. But before he could do anything, Yi Xian put a hand on his shoulder and shook his head. Only then did Tai Tsong calm down. Yi Xian knew Abyss very well. Although the man was arrogant, he wasn't despicable. Plus he was here. Even if Abyss wanted to play any tricks, he wouldn't be able to escape Yi Xian's eyes. Dozens of breaths later, the dark samsara disappeared. Abyss withdrew his hand, but his brows were tightly knitted together. How is it? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. Back then, your attack shattered her soul. Fortunately, you used your great powers to preserve the last bit of her soul. This gave her a chance to live. However, it's extremely difficult to revive her. We'll need to work together to cast a spell. Perhaps we can succeed, Abyss said in a low voice. All right. Yi Xian nodded slowly, then dismissed the others. He and Abyss stood side by side, their bodies slowly releasing the terrifying half-step eternal aura. Dark samsara, soul unity. Rumble. Something shocking happened. Abyss transformed into the dark samsara, his entire being dark and deep. The profound meaning of samsara appeared in Abyss, and a terrifying reversal occurred. Eternity unity. Yi Xian's entire body glowed as the 3 lifetimes laws and Tao bloomed. He had cultivated the art of samsara, and now with the cultivation of 3 lifetimes, he burst forth with astonishing power. The 2 half-step eternal experts worked together, and the power they released spread across the entire chaosverse, even affecting time and space. Beams of light appeared in the chaosverse, then turned into a shocking meteor shower in the Genesis lands. These were the fragments of Xiao's soul that had been scattered throughout the ages. Yi Xian and Abyss were working together to cast a spell, condensing her soul. This was a method that had never been seen before. In fact, Yi Xian speculated that if he wanted to revive Xiao, he would need to transcend the startling lands and enter the eternal realm. But when Yi Xian's 3 lifetimes combined into one and became a half-step eternal, he could vaguely sense that if he and Abyss joined forces, they would be able to revive Xiao. After all, both of them were at the half-step eternal realm and were considered the strongest experts in the eternal universe. If they joined forces, they would have a 50% chance of reviving Xiao. Boom! The ancient bronze coffin exploded, and Xiao floated in the air. The soul fragments continued to pour into her head, causing her body to tremble, and even her eyelids to tremble slightly. At this moment, Tai Tsong and Lu Bai were very excited. They stared at Xiao, especially Tai Tsong. He couldn't control his emotions, and he clenched his fists. Rumble! All of a sudden, a powerful will suddenly descended upon the origin grounds, and blood-red tribulation clouds appeared above everyone's heads. Scram! Tai Tsong roared. The immemorial evil light rose into the sky and shattered the scarlet blood tribulation cloud. The powerful intent also retreated in an instant. Reviving a dead person was a heaven-defying act. The will of the chaotic universe had just arrived, but it was instantly shattered by Tai Tsong's attack. In front of so many startling lands and 2 half-step eternal realm experts, the will of the chaotic universe couldn't withstand a single blow. This simple interlude didn't attract the attention of the few people who were in the middle of casting their spells, but it caused Yi Xian and Yuan to frown. Both of them were at the half-step eternal realm, so their realms were naturally not comparable to those startling lands and Abyss. The appearance of the tribulation clouds just now seemed to be the arrival of the chaotic universe's will, but it also indirectly explained a big problem. Everyone present was a startling land and Abyss expert, let alone 2 half-step eternal realm experts. It didn't make sense for the will of a mere chaosverse to have dared to descend here. There had to be some profound meaning behind this. Divine soul unification. Almost at the same time, Yi Xian and Abyss shouted in unison. They formed the eternal god art with both hands, and 2 terrifying beams of light shone between Xiao's eyebrows. It was at this moment that Xiao's fingers began to tremble, and her beautiful eyes opened with great difficulty. Xiao. When Tai Tsong saw Xiao open her eyes, he immediately rushed to her side. He was so happy that he cried and held Xiao's hands tightly. Tai Tsong? Didn't I die? Xiao murmured. She stared blankly at Tai Tsong in front of her, feeling as if she had just woken up from an eternal dream. It gave her an extremely unreal feeling. You won't die. I said I'll save you. Tai Tsang shouted excitedly. Big brother? Shi Yao's consciousness finally woke up. When she saw Yi Xian, she seemed to understand something. You're still very weak now. You need to consolidate your divine soul. We'll talk again after you recover, Yi Xian said with a smile. Little sister. Lu Bai came to Shi Yao's side with a smile and told her what had happened. Desolation, I've done the first thing for you. You can tell me the last thing, Abyss said coldly. I need you to come with me for the last thing. Yi Xian lightly smiled, then took a step forward and disappeared. Abyss frowned, but still followed Yi Xian into the distance. Yu and Tu's expressions were complicated. They didn't say goodbye to Lu Bai and the other two, and directly disappeared. Obviously, they were enemies, not friends. There was no need to say goodbye. At this moment, Tai Tsang and Shi Yao were talking about their feelings. Lu Bai accompanied them with a smile. However, Lu Bai's aura was obscure. Occasionally, he looked up at the eternal starry sky with a confused look in his eyes. It seemed that he was absent-minded. Eldritch world. What? You want me to help you resurrect the dead? Abyss was furious and looked at Yi Xian with hatred. At this moment, he was really angry and wanted to leave. What kind of joke was this? He had just resurrected Shi Yao, and he had consumed half of his cultivation. Even his divine soul was starting to weaken. Now, the second thing Yi Xian wanted him to do was to resurrect some ants. He couldn't accept this. That's right. Yi Xian wanted to resurrect the old people and let them reappear in the world. He couldn't succeed by himself, so he needed Abyss's help. Then are you going to help or not? Yi Xian lightly said as his eyes stared at the Abyss. Abyss was indignant. However, he was defeated by Yi Xian, and he even agreed to Yi Xian's two conditions. It was just that Abyss couldn't figure it out. Reviving Shi Yao was one thing. After all, Shi Yao was a primordial goddess and a living, breathing absolute. However, Yi Xian wanted to resurrect some ants. This really confused him. What good would it do him? Unfortunately, Abyss didn't know that in Yi Xian's heart, those old people who had passed away were much more important than Shi Yao. That was his guilt. He had waited for countless years. Now that he finally came to this step, he didn't want to continue waiting. Chapter 1944. It was his guilt. He'd waited for countless years, and now that he'd finally reached this point, he didn't want to wait any longer. If Yi Xian had only relied on himself, it would have been extremely difficult to resurrect his old friends. However, things were different with Abyss's help. Even Shi Yao, who was a terrifying existence, had been successfully resurrected. Naturally, his old friends would be no problem at all. Lay the formation. It was an unprecedented grand reincarnation formation. Yi Xian and Abyss had worked together to lay the formation. Both of them cultivated the mysteries of reincarnation and were half-step eternal realm experts. Working together, the grand reincarnation formation could be said to be the most powerful formation since ancient times. The formation defied the reincarnation of heaven and earth. It could change space-time and reassemble those whose bodies and souls had been destroyed, allowing them to reappear in the world. However, there were many people who needed to be resurrected. It wasn't just one person, so they needed to lay out the grand reincarnation formation and reassemble those who died. This was an extremely complicated project. Fortunately, with the cultivation of Yi Xian and Abyss, it didn't take much time to set up the Samsara Great Formation. Desolation, do you feel it? When the grand reincarnation formation was laid out, Abyss's expression turned solemn. He looked at Yi Xian with deep, dark eyes. Resurrect the will of the chaotic universe that appeared in Shi Yao. Yi Xian nodded solemnly. Someone is spying on us, Abyss said solemnly. It's the mysterious being in the gate of reincarnation above the eternal universe, Yi Xian murmured. The two had a brief conversation, then fell silent. They didn't need to say much. Both of them felt an extremely heavy pressure. It was as if a gaze from beyond the eternal universe had landed on the two of them, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. Are you afraid? Abyss pretended to be relaxed and smiled mockingly at Yi Xian. Afraid? Yi Xian also smiled, but his smile was very cold, and he said, The one who should be afraid is you, not me, because I will definitely transcend and truly become eternal. What a joke! Don't think that just because you've embarked on the path of 3 lives as one, you can walk ahead of me first. Let me tell you, your life is mine, and I will definitely enter the eternal realm before you. Then I will push open the gate of reincarnation and break the curse of eternal reincarnation, Abyss shouted coldly. I hope you can succeed. Yi Xian spoke calmly, but his hands were not idle. He finished setting up the last corner of the array, and the grand reincarnation array beneath his feet began to operate, bursting out with a Tong Tian light that penetrated the ground. Reincarnation Grand Array, heaven and earth were in chaos. Yi Xian and Abyss stood within the grand samsara formation, their bodies glowing with light. This was the light of the profound truths of samsara, which had broken through the shackles of the chaosverse. There was an old saying that went, "Everything is decided by the heavens." However, Yi Xian was someone who didn't believe in the heavens or fate. Looking back on the vicissitudes of life, there were always some people who had left a deep mark on Yi Xian's life. Even after endless years, Yi Xian could not forget them. Severing love, abandoning love, and ascending to the 9 heavens. Yi Xian looked back on the past. He had experienced a lot along the way. There were some things he knew were wrong, but he had to make mistakes again and again. Some people could not have died, but because of him, they were buried in the endless years. Today, he was half-step eternal realm. It could be said that he was half a step away from the eternal universe. There was no one who could keep him in check. Even the eternal universe could not do anything to him. Those who had passed away would finally return today. The guilt in his heart would also be released today. Samsara heaven and earth returned the souls. Almost at the same time, Yi Xian and Abyss roared in unison. The grand samsara formation beneath their feet spun in terrifying reverse. The light of samsara filled the world. The 2 half-step eternal realm cultivators simply shook the entire eternal universe. Invincible throughout the ages, the sole master of the present age. Whether it was Yi Xian or Abyss, the 2 had reached the strongest realm in the eternal universe. At this moment, they joined forces to open the grand samsara formation to revive some of the dead. No one could stop them, not even the eternal universe. The grand samsara formation spun in reverse. The space between heaven and earth was distorted. The broken soul fragments in the world gathered towards the grand samsara formation. Several blurry figures were condensing in the grand samsara formation. Clang, clang. Where am I? Looking around blankly, Tong Tian raised his hands helplessly. Clang, 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 clang. Yi Xian was extremely gratified to see his old friend again. He waved his hand and struck out with the 4 immortal slaying swords. Clang, 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 clang. The 4 immortal slaying swords circled around his body. The immortal slaying swords rotated above his head. The killing light poured down and completely merged with Tong Tian. Yi Xian? Tong Tian was speechless. He clearly remembered that he had died. Moreover, his soul had been destroyed. How did he come back to life again? But when he felt the 4 immortal slaying swords and saw Yi Xian smiling at him, he knew that he was not dreaming. He had really come back to life. Clang. Yi Xian. The reincarnation grand design under his feet spun in reverse once again. A second figure began to take form in the reincarnation grand design. A dazzling golden light appeared in the array. Looking through this dazzling golden light, one could see a rock in the array. The golden light was coming from this rock. Brother Wukong, wake up! Yi Xian's eyes were slightly fiery, and there was even a hint of anticipation within them. Bang! The mischievous rock exploded, and a monkey rushed out from the mischievous rock. Its golden fur was shining, and an untamed battle intent that could pierce through the heavens and the earth was shocking. Transform. Untamed and untamed. The monkey stretched his body between heaven and earth. Streaks of golden fighting spirit erupted from his body, illuminating the entire world. A Rui Jingu Bang shot over from the horizon. He held it in his hand. The golden shadow of the Rui Jingu Bang danced in the sky. A loud roar could be heard. Congratulations on your return, Brother Wukong. Yi Xian bowed with a gratified expression. He would never forget the scene when Sun Wukong transformed the world for him. Now that Sun Wukong had returned, he could fight again. The great sage, heaven's equal who would never admit defeat, would continue to write his own legend. Brother, thank you. Sun Wukong retracted his golden light. He looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Then he nodded with gratification. He had always believed that Yi Xian could reach the peak. He also believed that he would return to the world. It was all because he believed in Yi Xian. Brother, please wait a moment. Yi Xian forced himself to calm down. There were still old friends who needed to return. Now was not the time for the two of them to catch up. Chapter 1945. Rumble. The great reincarnation matrix was spinning in reverse in a terrifying manner. A bright moonlight rose up from the matrix, and then it formed a gentle and beautiful figure. Yi Xian. She was unparalleled in the world. Heaven and earth lost their color. That was not enough to describe the beauty of the moon fairy. Just her confused eyes made Yi Xian's heart tremble. Yi Xian had no choice but to admit that the beauty of the moon fairy was still the only one. All the beautiful words that could be used to describe her were unable to describe her. Didn't I die? Fairy Guanghan murmured as she looked at Yi Xian with a pair of sorrowful eyes. It was as if this was just a dream, and it was so unreal. Seeing his former lover again, Yi Xian had mixed feelings. He had killed the moon fairy with his own hands. The guilt had always been in his heart. Yi Xian was speechless. He slowly walked over to the unparalleled woman and gently pulled her into his embrace. It's all over. You're still alive. Fairy Guanghan leaned into Yi Xian's embrace in a daze. She could feel Yi Xian's familiar aura, and she could even feel his body temperature. This also caused his bewildered beautiful eyes to focus. I'm really still alive? The moon fairy bit her lips. She held Yi Xian's cheeks and looked at him with infatuation. Huang, don't be sentimental. I've lost more than half of my cultivation. If you don't hurry up, the reincarnation matrix will collapse. Abyss growled. He really couldn't stand Yi Xian being sentimental with a woman. Wait for me. Yi Xian gave the moon fairy a comforting look. He stood side by side with Abyss again. The reincarnation matrix shone brightly and sped up again. Buzz. This time, there was profound light condensing in the formation, and a graceful figure appeared, condensing at an extremely fast speed. Empyrean fairy. She was dressed in white and looked around blankly. However, when she saw Yi Xian, her eyes froze. She could only see Yi Xian's face. A clear tear slowly fell from her eye. Sorry I'm late. If there was one person Yi Xian felt the most guilty towards, it would definitely be the Empyrean fairy. When he was in the untainted world, he was the master of the celestial court. The Empyrean fairy married him and supported the celestial court for him. She had no regrets. When the 12 ancestors of sorcery arrived at the celestial court, they transformed into the real bodies of Pangu and stomped the Empyrean fairy to death, destroying her body and soul between heaven and earth. In the blink of an eye, an illusory flower bloomed. The two of them did not speak, but walked to each other's side and hugged each other tightly. Although they did not speak, everything was in silence. The two of them had understood each other through the exchange of glances. Wait for me. Yi Xian gently pushed Mystic Fairy away. Mystic Fairy nodded silently. However, the way she looked at Yi Xian was still as gentle as before. Hurry up, we don't have time. The reincarnation matrix consumes too much of our cultivation, Abyss shouted coldly. It was only because Yi Xian was silent and did not move. At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes were in a trance. A complicated look flashed across his eyes. His eyes were extremely erratic. At this moment, he wanted to see many people again. His mother, his younger siblings, his childhood sweetheart Xia Qingzhu, the extremely kind Gu Xiaoxiao, and many members of the celestial court who had died with him. But at this moment, Yi Xian hesitated. Because these people were different from the Empyrean fairy. The Empyrean fairy and the others had died in body and soul. However, his mother, younger siblings had been reincarnated countless times. They were still alive in the world in a different form. It was impossible for them to reassemble their souls. Unless Yi Xian used his great power to summon their reincarnated bodies here and then unlocked the sealed memories of the 10,000 reincarnations. But so what? After experiencing the 10,000 reincarnations, they were no longer the same people. Hey, what are you waiting for? Abyss frowned and growled. At this moment, he was operating the reincarnation matrix. His cultivation was greatly depleted, so he was naturally anxious. Fate comes and goes. Fate meets and disperses. Everything is gone with the wind. Yi Xian sighed. He waved his sleeves and the reincarnation matrix beneath his feet dispersed. The operation of the world returned to normal. Desolation, I've helped you fulfill both conditions. From now on, you and I owe each other nothing. Remember, when I step into the eternal realm, you will be doomed eternally. Abyss did not care about the people that Yi Xian had resurrected. These people were not even worth ants in his eyes. The only opponent in his heart was Yi Xian. After Abyss said that, he took a step and disappeared. From now on, he would pursue the eternal realm. He had to step into the eternal realm before Yi Xian and kill Yi Xian with his own hands. Husband. Empyrean Fairy and Moon Fairy quietly came behind Yi Xian. They accompanied him silently just like before. Brother. Sun Wukong did not know who Abyss was, but he could feel the horror of Abyss. Even a glance from Abyss could make his heart tremble. Yi Daoyu, thank you. Tong Tian came with the 4 immortal slaying swords. He could feel the power of Yi Xian and knew that Yi Xian had surpassed him by many realms. Come with me to the chaotic world. Yi Xian laughed heartily. We will go wherever you go. The 9 Heavens Profound Maiden and the Guanghan Fairy spoke at the same time. Even Yi Xian felt that it was a bit unbearable for these 2 peerless beauties to stand together. Your cultivation is too weak, but this is not a problem. Yi Xian did not dare to look directly at the 2 women and quickly changed the topic. Brother! Just as Yi Xian and the others were talking, 3 figures suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. They were the 3 earth-shattering impasse of the primitive age. Sister. Yi Xian nodded his head in gratification as he looked at Xiao's strange smile. Brother, they are? Xiao was still the same as before. Even if she had been sleeping for thousands of years, she was still weird. When she saw the state of the 2 women and Yi Xian, she naturally thought of the relationship between the 2 women and Yi Xian. Yi Xian wasn't good at emotional matters, so he hurriedly changed the topic and said, Little sister, now that you've woken up from your slumber, the 2 of them are too weak. Your illusionary technique is suitable for them, so I'll leave the task of cultivation to you. Brother, don't worry. I will take care of the cultivation of the 2 sisters-in-law. Xiao smiled playfully, then took the 2 women's hands and ran to the side. The 3 women also chatted amiably. Brother Wukong, fellow Taoist Skirich, this world is not the same as before. The so-called immortals are not worth mentioning. These 2 brothers of mine can be said to be the pinnacle existences of the eternal universe. In the coming days, let them guide you in your cultivation. Yi Xian introduced Lu Bai and Taizong to Sun Wukong and the Grandmaster of Heaven. After all, the 2 of them had just been resurrected, and their cultivation was still at the same level as before. It would be best if they could have 2 heaven-shaking absolute lands to help them cultivate. Without Yi Xian's introduction, Sun Wukong and Tong Tian had already felt the power of the 2 earth-shattering impasse. Sun Wukong was arrogant and had a fighting spirit that did not accept the world. It was very compatible with Taizong's Take-Seed-Song Heaven method, so Sun Wukong naturally chose Taizong. As for Tong Tian, he naturally chose to follow Lu Bai to cultivate. Everyone chatted for a while, and then under the leadership of Yi Xian, they left and returned to the chaotic world. Because the 12th Yuan Hui would start in a year, Yi Xian did not have much time to meet with his old friends. He still had very important things to do. When the 12th Yuan Hui started, the 12th small cauldron would also be born. Yi Xian still needed to combine the 3 worlds. Only in this way could he truly step into the eternal realm. Although it seemed that there was still a Yuan Hui, for Yi Xian, time was really tight. He had to combine the three worlds before the samsara destruction, create the strongest method of all time, and step into the eternal realm himself. Only then could he deal with the final tribulation. Chapter 1946. Chaotic World, Central Territory. A heavenly palace spanned between heaven and earth, and there were countless divine soldiers and divine generals patrolling heaven and earth, setting off this heavenly palace to the extreme. Jintian Palace. This was the dojo built by Yi Xian's disciples for him, and it was also the only holy land in the entire chaotic universe, revered by all living beings in the chaos. Yi Xian was the most important person in the world. After 11 Yuanhui periods in the chaotic universe, Yi Xian's name had already resounded throughout the universe. Even his disciples were the strongest throughout the ages, and no one dared to challenge him. On this day, Jintian Palace was extremely lively. It could be said that it was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, and the rumbling of bells echoed throughout the entire chaotic world. Old friends reunited, toasting each other. In the imperial palace, Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen sat on the left and right sides of Yi Xian, accompanied by three peerless beauties: Extreme Love Master, Guanghan Fairy, and Empyrean Fairy. These three women were all beautiful. At this moment, they were all accompanying Yi Xian, and all of them were Yi Xian's confidants. The three earth-shattering extremes and Sun Wukong Tongtian sat in the seats of honor, while Yi Xian's disciples sat behind. There were also many familiar faces of Yi Xian seated below. Everyone was drinking and chatting merrily, and it was very lively. This time, Yi Xian's return made Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen the happiest. These two guys had been by Yi Xian's side since the human world, and they had witnessed Yi Xian's step-by-step progress to today's realm. The most excited people were Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen. Today's grand event was only about friendship, and no disputes were discussed. In the midst of everyone's conversation, Yi Xian was also extremely emotional. There was only one thing that made Yi Xian feel awkward, and that was the existence of the three women. It could be said that Yi Xian was extremely repulsed by matters of the heart. At this moment, all three women were his wife in name, so he did not know how to face them. However, what surprised Yi Xian was that the three women seemed to be very harmonious. This was beyond Yi Xian's expectations. The Guanghan Fairy and the Nine Heavens Profound Maiden were already familiar with each other, so there was no need to mention it. The fact that the two of them were able to get along well with the Lord of Extreme Love was indeed a bit surprising to Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian did not dwell on these feelings. After all, in his eyes, the so-called love did not occupy anything. He only wanted to become stronger. The event lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. During this time, the Lord of Human Tao and the Lord of Space-Time arrived one after another. The shadow of Aeon was also hiding in the shadows, protecting the entire Skybearing Palace. The saddest of all was Aeon Shadow. He was a taboo character, but he had secretly become Yi Xian's servant, helping him protect the entire Skybearing Palace. But when he saw the 3 shocking lands of despair and learned that Yi Xian was half a step away from Eternal Realm, all his arrogance disappeared. He was truly desperate to be a servant. Finally, the gathering of old friends was finally over. Everyone returned to their own dojos to rest. Only Yi Xian and Fatso Huang were left in the palace. They've all gone to rest. Why haven't you left? Yi Xian smiled. He hadn't been alone with Fatso Huang for a long time. He looked at Fatso Huang with a teasing smile. Mister, there is something I don't know if I should say. Fatso Huang frowned. He quietly looked around, as if to see if anyone was eavesdropping on their conversation. What do you want to say? Yi Xian was startled. The Moon Fairy, Fatso Huang said in a low voice. What happened to her? Yi Xian hesitated slightly, but a strange look flashed in his eyes. He had already vaguely guessed Fatso Huang's intentions. My good mister, have you forgotten that you killed her with your own hands? Although she has been resurrected this time, can't you be sure what she is thinking? Fatso Huang frowned. As Fatso Huang's words fell, Yi Xian fell silent. He knew that Fatso Huang was right. He had killed the Moon Fairy with his own hands, and this matter had always been a knot in his heart. Mister, I'm not afraid that she will harm you. After all, her cultivation is right there. I'm just afraid that you will lose yourself in her beauty and destroy your Taoist foundation, Fatso Huang said worriedly. It was no wonder that Fatso Huang reminded Yi Xian. After all, the moon fairy had enchanted everyone in the untainted world. Fatso Huang was afraid that Yi Xian would fall into an emotional whirlpool and be unable to extricate himself. Because he had followed Yi Xian all the way here, Fatso Huang had already discovered Yi Xian's greatest weakness. That's right, it was love. Although Yi Xian seemed to have severed his feelings and abandoned his love, it was precisely because Yi Xian knew that this was his greatest weakness that he displayed merciless ruthlessness. Killing Xia Qingzhu and strangling the moon fairy with his own hands seemed like a vicious move by Yi Xian, but it actually meant that Yi Xian was afraid of falling into love. That was why he had done this. Therefore, Yi Xian had always resisted so-called love. Whether it was the extreme love master or the human Tao master who was interested in him, even Shi Yao, who had just arrived at Buried Heaven Palace. These women all had feelings for him, but Yi Xian had always been cold and indifferent. He did not want to be tainted at all. Yi Xian was afraid. He was afraid of these feelings, so he showed disdain for love. In fact, this was also his greatest weakness. You are the only one who knows me, Fatso Huang. Yi Xian laughed at himself and then patted Fatso Huang on the shoulder. Sir, it's not that I have a problem with the moon fairy. If you didn't kill her with your own hands, I wouldn't have said anything. But you still have to be careful about this matter. Fatso Huang reminded him in a deep voice. Speaking of viciousness and ruthlessness, Fatso Huang was not inferior to Yi Xian. He saw through the so-called love more clearly. After all, before he followed Yi Xian, Fatso Huang was deeply hurt because of love. He even killed the woman he loved most with his own hands. Then he was thrown into the prison. But in the end, he was saved by Yi Xian and followed Yi Xian all the way to the chaotic world. Love was the most hurtful. It was like an invisible sword that could pierce people's hearts and make them feel so painful that they would rather die. It really had little to do with cultivation. Fatso Huang was worried about Yi Xian, so he naturally had to remind Yi Xian. Perhaps if others advised Yi Xian, it would make Yi Xian angry and think that they were trying to sow discord between Yi Xian and the moon fairy. But Fatso Huang was different. To put it bluntly, in Yi Xian's heart, Fatso Huang was much more important than the moon fairy. If one of them had to die, Yi Xian would definitely choose the moon fairy. Don't worry, I know what to do. Yi Xian nodded slowly. In that case, I'm relieved. The 3 mistresses are waiting for you tonight. You should have a good rest. Fatso Huang smiled wretchedly and gave Yi Xian a look that all men understood. Then he left. Yi Xian was stunned and then smiled helplessly. He was really speechless about Fatso. Except for Lu Bai, who was his close friend, Fatso Huang was the only one who could confide in him. Chapter 1947. It was lonely at the top. When one reached Yi Xian's level, even his old friends were in awe of him, and their words were restrained. However, Fatso Huang was the only one who was not restrained at all. Where should I go? After Fatso Huang's reminder, Yi Xian mumbled to himself. At this moment, there were 3 beauties waiting for him. This was also an extremely difficult thing to do. Sigh. Yi Xian sighed and chose the moon fairy. It was not because of the blessings, but because he wanted to resolve the knot in his heart. Moon Palace. This was the dojo that Yi Xian's disciple had built for the moon fairy. It was also built according to the moon palace in the untainted world. Even a Tong Tian osmanthus tree was rooted beside the moon palace. It had completely restored the original appearance of the moon palace. When Yi Xian entered the moon palace, he saw the moon fairy sitting on the frost jade bed. When she noticed Yi Xian's arrival, her beautiful and cold face blushed slightly. The moon fairy was indescribably beautiful. Her rosy cheeks were tender and tender. Coupled with her exquisite figure, Yi Xian's heart beat slightly faster. As long as it was a man, he wouldn't be able to resist such a beauty. Yi Xian was naturally no exception. However, Yi Xian could control himself and remain calm and collected. Shao Yi, Yi Xian came to the moon fairy's side. He wanted to say something but stopped. He had already thought of how to say it, but he did not know what to say. I don't blame you. Perhaps sensing that Yi Xian wanted to say something, the moon fairy bit her lips and said, "The mystic fairy has already explained to me. Back then, in order to break through to a higher level, you fell into a state of madness. In order to pass the love tribulation, you had to give up love." Speaking of this, the moon fairy's eyes were filled with tears. She looked up at Yi Xian and said, "Actually, all these years, I have always wanted to ask you something." Looking at the weeping beauty, Yi Xian sighed softly and said, "Speak. Is cultivation really more important than love in your life?" Fairy Guanghan bit her lip and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was slightly taken aback by this question, but he didn't hesitate for long before giving Fairy Guanghan a definite answer. As the saying goes, love is nothing more than an illusion, and beauties are nothing more than pink skeletons. Only eternal strength is the most real existence, Yi Xian said solemnly. The moon fairy smiled, but her smile was a little sad. She looked relieved and said, "You are still you. You haven't changed at all after so many years. If you could choose again, I think you would still kill me, wouldn't you?" Not bad. What was a straight man? At this moment, Yi Xian was a straight man. If it were any other man, he would definitely lie to his lover. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was not one of them. After getting the answer she wanted, Fairy Guanghan's gaze was complicated. She really loved and hated Yi Xian. All kinds of complicated emotions were stirred up. Actually, I really can't compare to Empyrean Fairy. She knows that you don't care about love, but she is still willing to stay by your side. She is even willing to die for you. She has no regrets, Fairy Guanghan murmured. Little E, actually, you don't have to feel conflicted. I have abandoned many things for cultivation. Family, love, and even friendship. In order to become stronger, I have become a heartless person. You know this better than anyone else. So even if you leave now, I will understand. Since he had already said this, Yi Xian had nothing to hide. After all, the knot in their hearts needed to be untied. No need to say more. I just want to be like Empyrean Fairy and be by your side forever. Even if you don't love me, I will have no regrets. In the next moment, the entire Guanghan Palace was covered by fog. A white palace dress was scattered on the ground. Yi Xian's surprised voice could be heard. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. Perhaps it was also the most beautiful night of Yi Xian's life. Outside the Guanghan Palace, Fatso Huang pouted. Then he murmured wretchedly, "Since ancient times, heroes have a weakness for the charms of beautiful women. This saying is true." "Sir, you are so talented." Fatso Huang looked up in shock. The sky changed. The Empyrean Fairy and the Extreme Love Master had actually entered the Guanghan Palace. This made him murmur. His eyes were full of admiration. 1 dragon and 3 phoenixes. Fatso Huang praised loudly. However, Yi Xian's scolding came from inside the Guanghan Palace. "Get lost." Fatso Huang hurriedly disappeared. It was naturally better for him to stay away from this kind of thing. The next day, Yi Xian walked out of the Guanghan Palace, looking a little tired. It was as if he had just fought with abyss for thousands of years and almost died at his hands. This night almost took away half of Yi Xian's old life. However, he really wanted more. "Sir." As soon as Yi Xian entered the Guanghan Palace, Fatso Huang hurriedly came to greet him. Yi Xian's expression changed. He hurriedly swept away his tiredness and appeared calm and composed. "Hehe, sir, you still have lipstick marks on your neck." Fatso Huang laughed shamelessly. This immediately shocked Yi Xian. He clearly remembered that when he came out of the Guanghan Palace, he deliberately observed his appearance. There was nothing strange at all. "Damn it. You even dare to tease me now." Seeing Fatso Huang's wretched and shameless smile, Yi Xian suddenly understood. He laughed and slapped Fatso Huang away. "Sir, please don't be angry. I was just joking." Fatso Huang trotted back and smiled obsequiously. "Don't tell anyone about what happened yesterday. Otherwise, if I find out, I'll skin you alive." Yi Xian scolded jokingly. Sir, don't worry. Fatso Huang, I swear on my honor that this matter will not be spread. Otherwise, you don't have to do it. I'll skin you myself. Fatso Huang chuckled. Where's your honor? Yi Xian was completely speechless at Fatso Huang. It was rare for the two of them to joke around, but it also showed the affection between brothers. Sir, there's still a year until the 12th Eon. I've already done everything you asked me to do. However, there's still no sign of the strongest in the 12th Eon. When it came to business, Fatty Huang put away his cheeky smile. No matter. When the 12th Eon opens, the 12th strongest will naturally appear. The only thing I'm concerned about is when the 12th heavenly void-shattering cauldron will appear. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Yi Xian naturally wanted to obtain the 12th heavenly void-shattering cauldron because he needed it to open the gate of reincarnation. Moreover, Yi Xian had reached perfection in the three realms technique in Tao. However, if he wanted to combine the three realms and create the strongest technique in Tao of all time, reaching the realm of eternal transcendence, there was no opportunity at all. Perhaps Yi Xian guessed that the opportunity was in the 12th small cauldron. Chapter 1948. Heaven as heaven, earth as earth. This was the saying of heaven, earth, and heaven. At the beginning of time, all things were born. Since the beginning of the desolate era, countless chaotic universes had been created. All things came from nothing, from something to nothing, and from nothing to beginning. This cycle was endless. When the 11th period ended and the 12th period began, the entire chaotic universe began to change. Spirit Qi filled the entire chaotic universe, filling it with vitality. All things competed, the goal was to become the strongest. When the 12th period began, an unavoidable war broke out. In order to compete for the position of the strongest in the 12th period, countless beings killed each other. They wanted to prove their Tao and become the master of the 12th period. Heaven-bearing palace. Yi Xian breathed in and out. The laws and Taos of the three lifetimes lingered around his body. He didn't show any concern for the arrival of the 12th period. He was comprehending laws and creating Taos. Yi Xian wanted to combine the three lifetimes as one. This was an extremely difficult path. It was extremely difficult to combine the laws and Taos of the three lifetimes. Why is it like this? Boom! A terrifying ripple spread out from Yi Xian's body, causing the surrounding void to distort and shatter. At this moment he slowly opened his eyes. Disappointment. Extreme disappointment. The 12th period had been open for 100 million years. Yi Xian had been comprehending the three lifetimes as one for 100 million years, but in the end he didn't gain anything. Instead, he almost suffered a backlash from the laws and Taos of the three lifetimes. Difficult, difficult, difficult. This was the most difficult hurdle for Yi Xian to break through. Although the three lifetimes as one sounded simple, it was impossible to achieve. Past, present, and future. Three different laws and Taos were incompatible like water and fire. As soon as they merged, a tremendous backlash burst out. Even with Yi Xian's half-step eternal cultivation, he couldn't bear it. Yi Xian once stubbornly tried to combine the laws and Taos of the three lifetimes as one, but it almost destroyed his body and soul. After this, Yi Xian learned his lesson and gave up on this method. Yi Xian fell into deep thought. He recalled all the laws he knew and even took out the ancient bronze scripture and heaven-punishing halberd to study them together. But he still couldn't find a way to combine the three lifetimes as one. Sir! Suddenly, Fatso Huang quietly appeared beside Yi Xian and bowed to Yi Xian. Has the strongest of the 12th Eon appeared? Yi Xian's thoughts turned as he raised his head to look at Fatty Huang. He wasn't concerned about who would become the strongest in the 12th Yuan Hui. What he was truly concerned about was the whereabouts of the last small cauldron. Mister, speaking of which, it's a little strange. 100 million years have already passed, but the 12th strongest has yet to appear. Fatso Huang reported. That's strange. Yi Xian was startled at first, then he fell into deep thought. One had to know that with the opening of every Yuan Hui, a new strongest would appear in an extremely short period of time. It definitely wouldn't be too late. But now that more than 100 million years had passed and the last utmost powerful being had yet to appear, Yi Xian found it a little strange. He could vaguely feel that something was amiss. Is there any news about the last small cauldron? Yi Xian asked in a deep voice. Fatso Huang smiled bitterly and shook his head. He had sent out almost all of Buried Heaven Palace's people to search for it, but there were no clues at all. It seems that the opportunity for the last small cauldron still lies with the last strongest. Yi Xian frowned and said, the birth of every small cauldron was related to one of the strongest. It was just like the fate of the chaotic spacetime. The three of them had all obtained a small cauldron. It was the same for the other strongest. They had all obtained a small cauldron several times. His disciple, Yi Xian, had obtained it by chance and then gave it to Yi Xian. According to this logic, the last small cauldron must be closely related to the last strongest. It seems that I have to make a trip personally. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. He had already made up his mind. He would personally search for the last strongest and the last small cauldron. Sir, there's no need to trouble you for such a small matter. Just leave it to me. Fatso Huang hurriedly dissuaded him. After all, Yi Xian had finally been able to stay in Buried Heaven Palace peacefully. All of his enemies had already been eliminated. If he had to do such a small matter personally, Fatso Huang would feel guilty. This is already the last Yuan Hui. I don't want any accidents to happen. Moreover, I still haven't been able to comprehend 3 worlds as one. It's good to go out for a walk. Yi Xian said. I'm incompetent. Fatso Huang bowed guiltily. He didn't feel good about not being able to complete such a small matter. It's not your fault. It's related to the small cauldron. It's not something you can control. Yi Xian patted Fatso Huang's shoulder and comforted him. Yi Daoyu. Suddenly, an anxious voice came from outside the imperial palace. A figure arrived in an instant. It was Tong Tian. Yi Xian was startled. Tong Tian was obviously cultivating with Lu Bai. Why would he come here with an anxious face? Could something have happened? What happened? Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. An extremely bad feeling rose in his heart. Yi Daoyu, quickly go and take a look at Daoist Bai. Something's wrong with him. Tong Tian said with a heavy expression. Buzz. As soon as Tong Tian finished speaking, Yi Xian instantly disappeared from the imperial palace. Who am I? Who am I? Ugh. Lu Bai covered his head and roared. His eyes were bloodshot. He crawled on the ground and crazily hit the ground. The terrifying force caused the ground to crack. Seal, Shi Yao, and Tai Tsang had a heavy expression. They were casting seals on Lu Bai's body to stabilize his emotions. Yi Xian instantly appeared. When he saw Lu Bai's crazed appearance, he felt a sharp pain in his heart. He already understood Lu Bai's situation at the moment. He once again fell into self-denial. He was entangled in the memories of Tai Chu and Lu Bai. He could no longer tell which one was him. Brother Bai, wake up. Yi Xian roared. He wanted to wake up Lu Bai, who had gone berserk, but it was completely useless. Lu Bai's eyes were bloodshot as he continued to roar. At this moment, Lu Bai's expression was ferocious like a madman. Even the 2 earth-shattering seals couldn't suppress him. Brother, his divine soul is shattering. If we don't stop him, he will really go crazy and die with his divine soul shattered. Shi Yao said anxiously. Shi and Tai Tsang cast seals to suppress Lu Bai. However, they could only suppress his cultivation. They couldn't stop his divine soul from shattering. Puma. Lu Bai's eyes were bloodshot. He kept grabbing his hair and roaring crazily. His eyes were full of confusion as if he had lost his mind. Freeze. Yi Xian pointed his finger and fixed Lu Bai in place. The 3 world arts and Tao stabilized Lu Bai's divine soul. However, Lu Bai still couldn't calm down. This made Yi Xian's expression extremely solemn. Chapter 1949. Yi Xian didn't expect Lu Bai's situation to be so serious. He really didn't know what to do to help Lu Bai. Brother Bai, you are you. In this life, you are Lu Bai. You have never been anyone else. Yi Xian roared, hoping that Lu Bai would come to his senses. Unfortunately, Yi Xian's words seemed to ignite a fuse, completely igniting Lu Bai. His aura became even more chaotic and crazy, and he kept growling, "Who am I? Big brother, we can't go on like this. Otherwise, even if his divine soul survives, his consciousness will fall into madness," Xiao said. Yi Xian also knew the seriousness of this matter. It wasn't that he didn't want to help Lu Bai, but the memories of the two lives collided with each other. Lu Bai had to overcome this difficulty by himself. Outsiders couldn't help him. Boom. Suddenly, something happened that shocked Yi Xian. An extremely terrifying death chi appeared on Lu Bai's body. His body was surrounded by the forbidden death light, and his whole body calmed down at this moment. Only his eyes were as red as blood. How is this possible? Yi Xian roared in horror. He couldn't believe the scene in front of him. Not to mention Yi Xian, even Shi Yao and Tai Tsung couldn't keep calm and looked at Lu Bai in horror. The forbidden death light was the product of a forbidden character's failure. How could a forbidden character's power appear on a forbidden character's body? This was simply a fantasy story, and it was simply impossible to believe. Brother, be careful of samsara. In the next moment, without waiting for Yi Xian's shocked thoughts to return, Lu Bai spoke in a hoarse voice with difficulty. He trembled as he pointed at the sky, and then strangely disappeared. Only a strand of death aura remained at the location where he disappeared, and then it slowly dissipated. Brother Bai? Absolute beginning? Yi Xian roared in shock. He couldn't figure out what had happened to Lu Bai. Why did the death chi suddenly appear? Why did it suddenly disappear? Even a half-step eternal realm expert like him couldn't detect it. It was as if Lu Bai had never existed in this world. How could this be? What happened? Strange. Shocking. He couldn't understand. Yi Xian was unable to calm down. It was all because of Lu Bai's sudden disappearance and the death light on his body that he was completely confused. Be careful of reincarnation? Yi Xian's eyes trembled slightly. These were the words that Lu Bai had left him before he disappeared. But what had happened to Lu Bai? What had happened to him? No one could explain this strange scene. Even Yi Xian, a half-step eternal expert, couldn't explain what had just happened. Big brother, where did Tai Chu go? Tai Tsung looked at Yi Xian in shock. No idea. With Yi Xian's current cultivation base, he could perceive the entire chaotic universe, but he couldn't sense Lu Bai's aura. Chapter 1950. With a single thought, heaven and earth would know. With a single thought, everything would know. On the vast land, Yi Xian walked like a mortal, but under the cover of his divine soul, he could sense the entire chaotic universe. He was looking for someone, the last supreme expert. With his current cultivation and realm, even an ant in the other corner of the universe could not escape his perception. In the great Shiyuan region? The next moment, Yi Xian was stunned. He felt an aura that was faintly compatible with the chaotic universe. The source of this aura was in the western region, which made Yi Xian a little puzzled. Logically speaking, the last supreme expert should be in the central region after the opening of the 12 yuans for 100 million years. He did not expect it to be in the border of the western region. Qi! Yi Xian stepped into the sky and moved the heaven and earth. The next moment, he appeared in the great Shiyuan region. The chaotic world was divided into 5 regions, and the most prosperous one was naturally the central region. The other 4 regions could not be compared with the central region. At this moment, Yi Xian stood in the sky above the western region. He was calmly feeling the aura of the last supreme expert. The next moment, his figure changed and he disappeared into the sky again. This was a desolate mountain. The whole mountain was dark and red. Terrible heat waves were emitted from the mountain, and the world was filled with the pungent smell of sulfur. This was a volcano that towered into the sky. The crater of the volcano was illuminated by flames. From time to time, it rolled violently and spewed terrible magma, scorching the world. As soon as Yi Xian appeared here, he saw a young man climbing on the mountain. The young man carried a bamboo basket on his back and jumped between the mountains, picking fire-glossy mushrooms. His skin was copper, his body was strong, and there was a maturity between his eyebrows that did not match his age. Interesting, the last supreme expert is a young man. The 12 yuans have been open for 100 million years, but he has not stepped on the path of cultivation. Yi Xian murmured in surprise. Since Yi Xian had found the person he was looking for, he did not want to waste time. He stepped out and appeared beside the young man. "Little guy, what's your name?" Yi Xian's sudden appearance caused the youth's expression to change. He brandished the hatchet in his hand and slashed towards Yi Xian. Judging from his posture, he didn't hesitate in the slightest. So decisive at such a young age. Not bad. Yi Xian didn't move. The young man froze in midair, looking at Yi Xian with a serious expression. His eyes were as fierce as a wolf's, but there was a hint of fear in them. The young man knew that he had encountered a cultivator. Otherwise, that saber strike just now would have been enough to kill him. Chapter 1951. After saying that, Abyss looked back at Ning Chuan and said, "Boy, you've taken the pill. Now kowtow and acknowledge me as your master." "Thank you for the pill, senior. But I've never said that I want to acknowledge you as my master." Ning Chuan rolled his eyes and replied in a neither haughty nor humble tone. "Do you want to die?" No one dared to refuse Abyss. Now that he was rejected by a boy, Abyss's aura turned cold. His pair of abyss-like eyes made the boy take a few steps back in fear. "He's just a kid. You've scared him. Buzz." Yi Xian waved his hand to disperse Abyss's aura, which made Ning Chuan gasp for breath. He almost thought that he was going to die in the hands of this terrifying man. "Desolate, I'll definitely take him as my disciple." Abyss said coldly. "First, I want to correct your mistake. Desolate is my name in my previous life. In this life, my name is Yi Xian. I hope you won't call me by the wrong name again. Second, you're not looking for an opportunity to break through the eternal realm. Instead, you're here to cause trouble for me. You really deserve to die." "What a joke." Abyss retorted, "If you can take him, why can't I?" Looking at Abyss's cold and arrogant expression, Yi Xian really wanted to kill him. However, they were both half-step eternal realm experts. Even if he could defeat Abyss, he would be weakened and couldn't kill him at all. The previous battle between the two had proved everything. Therefore, Yi Xian couldn't do anything to Abyss. "Ning Chuan, let me ask you, who do you want to acknowledge as your master?" Yi Xian ignored Abyss and asked the boy. "This?" Ning Chuan's face was heavy. He knew that no matter who he chose, he would offend the other person. This was not the result he wanted. Ning Chuan is grateful for the two seniors' kindness. However, this matter really makes things difficult for me. If the two seniors are sincere, can you give me some time to consider before giving an answer? Ning Chuan rolled his eyes and said, "Who are Yi Xian and Abyss?" He could tell what the young man was thinking at a glance. It was obvious that the young man didn't want to offend anyone, and he didn't want to miss this great opportunity either. But Yi Xian and Abyss didn't think much of it. After all, the so-called apprenticeship was nothing to Yi Xian. He just wanted to use the boy to find the last cauldron. As for Abyss, his idea was even simpler. Before he found a way to break through the eternal realm, he would never let Yi Xian walk ahead of him. This was also the reason why he had to compete with Yi Xian for a disciple. Something interesting happened. Two dignified half-step eternal realm experts, two peak experts of the eternal universe, accompanied a young man every day and taught him the Tao of cultivation. If this matter were to spread out, who knew how many people would be envious of Ning Chuan? They would want nothing more than to replace him. "Kid, my 9 tribulations heaven abyss technique is invincible throughout the ages. You have to comprehend it carefully." In front of a waterfall, huge waves rumbled. On a blue stone next to the waterfall, Abyss was teaching, and Ning Chuan was listening attentively. Yi Xian stood alone, looking at Abyss's pestering indifferently. He didn't expect Abyss to teach his 9 tribulations heaven abyss technique to the young man. Yi Xian and Abyss had a 3-point agreement. The two would take turns to teach the young man until Ning Chuan became an omnipotent expert. At that time, he could choose who he wanted to take as his master. Of course, Yi Xian didn't really want to take him as a disciple, nor did he have any intention of teaching him the technique. His goal was to find the last cauldron through Ningchuan. Time flew by like a white steed flitting by. With the two half-step eternal realm experts teaching him, Ningchuan's cultivation increased day by day. Especially with Abyss's generosity, various pills and spirit essences made Ningchuan's cultivation soar at a terrifying speed. In just a few hundred years, Ningchuan had opened the 9 heavenly gates of the immortal realm, which was simply incredible in the eyes of ordinary cultivators. An ordinary cultivator might not be able to reach the 9 heavenly gates of the immortal realm in 1 yuan hui, but a mortal boy had done it in a few hundred years. Of course, this was all thanks to Abyss. Without the help of his pills, Ningchuan wouldn't have succeeded even with his unparalleled aptitude and perseverance. Ningchuan, you've opened the 9 heavenly gates. As long as you step into the half-step omnipotent realm, you'll be able to break through to the omnipotent realm and truly dominate the 12th yuan hui. Now, as long as you kneel down and kowtow to me, I'll let you become a half-step omnipotent realm expert and help you become the omnipotent ruler of the 12th yuan hui. Green mountains and clear waters, willow trees rustled gently. Under an ancient pine tree, Abyss was brainwashing Ningchuan and explaining how powerful he was. Unfortunately, Ningchuan was unmoved. He wasn't moved by Abyss's words at all. Instead, he looked hopefully at Yi Xian. After experiencing the teachings of 2 half-step eternal realm experts for hundreds of years, Ningchuan was no longer the ignorant boy he used to be. He knew what the highest realm of cultivators looked like. Once upon a time, the omnipotent realm was a realm he didn't dare to dream of. However, after cultivating with Yi Xian and Abyss for hundreds of years, he was no longer satisfied with the omnipotent realm. According to Yi Xian's explanation, the 9 heavenly gates was an incomplete cultivation path. Only by opening the 12 heavenly gates and combining them to reach the heaven-defying realm could one be considered to have truly stepped into the palace of cultivation. And this was just the beginning. Even if one stepped into the heaven-defying realm, they still needed to open the 9 heaven-shocking transformations before they could peek into the omnipotent realm of eternity. When Ningchuan learned that both of them were half-step eternal realm experts, his ambition grew infinitely. He hoped to become someone like Yi Xian and Abyss. Unfortunately, according to Yi Xian and Abyss, the chaotic universe of the future was limited to the heaven-defying transformation. Moreover, even opening the 10th heavenly gate was as difficult as ascending to heaven, let alone the heaven-defying transformation. At this moment, Abyss was bewitching Ningchuan, but Ningchuan's mind was on opening the 10th heaven gate. Moreover, he knew that Yi Xian was very experienced in this aspect, because he'd opened the 12 heaven gates in the later Chaos Verse and even cultivated to the half-step eternal realm. Boy, did you hear what I said? Abyss's face turned cold. He found that Ningchuan was absent-minded, which immediately made him angry. Senior, Ningchuan doesn't want to become an omnipotent realm expert. I only want to open the 10th heavenly gate and follow in the footsteps of the 2 seniors, Ningchuan said solemnly. Impossible, Abyss scolded coldly. There's no yuan qi of heaven and earth in this era. Even if you were in the 3 strongest eras, your aptitude would only reach the heaven-defying realm at most. Ningchuan, I know you're ambitious, but I advise you to be content with what you have. Otherwise, you'll end up miserable. Yi Xian said faintly, giving him a warning. Yi Xian was really impatient. If it weren't for the last cauldron, he would have left long ago. But since he couldn't find the cauldron, he could only follow Ningchuan temporarily. Seniors, I don't dare to dream of becoming a half-step eternal realm expert, but I want to become an omnipotent realm expert. I hope you can help me. One had to admit that Ningchuan was not only ambitious, but also bold. When he found that Yi Xian and Abyss wouldn't harm him, he begged. Omnipotent realm expert? Yi Xian smiled. His smile was very cold as he said, in this era, a heaven-defying change is the limit. You're just wishful thinking. I'll give you 3 days to think about it. You'd better become an omnipotent realm expert of the 12th period as soon as possible. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Yi Xian flicked his sleeve, then took a step forward and disappeared. Boy, think carefully. As long as you acknowledge me as your master, even if he wants to kill you, I can guarantee your safety. Abyss said coldly before disappearing as well. Although Ning Chuan's aptitude was good, he was nothing in the eyes of Abyss. He was only doing this to ruin Yi Xian's plan. Damn it. Watching the two disappear, Ning Chuan muttered with a gloomy face and slammed his fists on the ground. He was really unwilling to become an omnipotent realm expert. After witnessing the strength of the two, he deeply understood how weak the so-called omnipotent realm expert was in front of them. I can't accept it. Actually, I can help you open the 10th gate of heaven and even help you break through to the heaven-defying realm. Even the 9 transformations shocking heavens is not impossible. If you are willing, I can even make you become someone like them, truly on the same level as them. Suddenly, a light voice rang in Ning Chuan's ears. This shocked him and he looked for the source of the voice. It was so quiet that there wasn't a single sound. He appeared. Zhou looked at Yi Xian with a solemn expression. When he said this, his expression was unusually solemn. From the day they stepped into the land of extinction, both of them knew that there was a transcendent existence above the eternal universe. However, neither of them had seen this person before. If anyone had seen this person, it was Zhou who had seen this person's back. However, this memory was extremely blurry for Yi Xian. A large part of Zhou's memory in the gate of reincarnation seemed to have been erased. Except for some fragmented memories, even Yi Xian didn't know anything about this person, let alone what kind of existence he was. However, there was one thing that Yi Xian was sure of. This person was at least in the eternal realm. He was definitely above Tou and Zhou. Follow him, Yi Xian said briefly. The two of them looked at each other and disappeared into the void. 300 million years. 300 million years had passed. Yi Xian and Zhou had been secretly observing Ning Chuan for 300 million years. However, apart from cultivating every day, he didn't do anything unusual, let alone take out the small cauldron to comprehend. These 300 million years were long enough to make Abyss feel bored. However, Yi Xian waited patiently without the slightest bit of impatience. Chapter 1953. Because he believed that his intuition was right. Something must have happened to Ning Chuan. Although 300 million years had passed, Ning Chuan did not show any abnormalities. However, this was the biggest doubt in Yi Xian's eyes. Yi Xian actually admired Ning Chuan because Ning Chuan was very similar to him. Whether it was scheming or means, Ning Chuan was almost exactly the same as he was when he was young. They were both vicious and merciless, decisive in killing, and unyielding in enduring silently. There was a saying that went, "The person who knows you the best, other than your enemy, is yourself." Since Ning Chuan's personality was similar to his, Ning Chuan would definitely be on guard. He would even hide for 300 million years without giving himself away. It's been 300 million years. This kid has been cultivating hard, but he still hasn't found a way to open the 10th heaven gate. I don't think there's any problem with him. Abyss finally lost his patience. Wait. Yi Xian only said one word. He hid in the void and looked down at Ning Chuan. In terms of patience, both Abyss and Ning Chuan were much worse than the others. Another 100 million years passed. Abyss was almost about to give up. He even wanted to leave this place to comprehend the opportunity to enter the eternal realm. After all, the great calamity of reincarnation was approaching. He did not want to waste time here. Unfortunately, Yi Xian pulled him back and stopped him from leaving. He continued to let Abyss wait with him. During this period, the strongest of the 12th Yuan Hui still did not appear. This was something that had never happened before. The new Yuan Hui had been open for more than 500 million years. It was more than half of the time, but no new strongest had appeared. In a gloomy ancient cave, Ning Chuan sat cross-legged and breathed. He slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. At this moment, his eyes slowly opened. A strange look flashed across his eyes. It's about time, right? Ning Chuan muttered to himself. He had endured for a full 400 million years in order to prevent himself from revealing any flaws and avoid being secretly monitored by Yi Xian and the other two. After 400 million years, Ning Chuan believed that the two should have left. He should be safe now. However, for the sake of caution, Ning Chuan still laid down layers upon layers of formations, not daring to be careless in the slightest. Even though he had endured for 400 million years, he still did not feel at ease. Unfortunately, everything he did fell into Yi Xian's eyes. Abyss's face was cold, and his eyes were filled with shame and anger. If Yi Xian had not asked him to stay, he might have really fallen for this brat's trick. Now that he saw Ning Chuan lay down layers upon layers of arrays, it was clear that there was something wrong with him. A small cauldron appeared in Ning Chuan's hand, causing him to look at it with infatuation. I don't care if you're in the gate of reincarnation or some bullshit eternal will of the universe. Since you dare to appear here today, don't go back alive. Rumble. Dark reincarnation, Tian Yuan across the sky. Yuan didn't move, but once he moved, it was earth-shattering. He erupted with a terrifying power. His half-step eternal realm cultivation base was terrifying to the extreme. Boom. Yuan didn't waste any words. He threw a punch at you, and the terrifying power of the dark reincarnation emerged. This punch was so terrifying that it could even destroy the entire chaotic universe. But in the next moment, something strange happened. The power of Abyss's punch was disappearing. When it arrived in front of Ian, it was all gone. Huh! Yuan's expression changed. Only he knew how terrifying his attack was. Even Yi Xian wouldn't dare to take it head-on. However, it was actually completely useless before Ian. This simply caused him to feel disbelief, and an extremely great feeling of frustration arose in his heart. Don't be fooled by him. He's just a will. He doesn't have a physical body at all. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared, waking Yuan up. He realized that Yu was just as Yi Xian said. Not only could he not sense his existence, but Yu also didn't show any power. He was just a wisp of illusory will. I see. Yuan was enlightened. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.